Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 3081, Rules of the Land of Sword Grief. The snake goddess gasped. She had never seen something like this happen before. If she used this golden red crystal to forge a body protection weapon, would this make her practically invincible? Her tender fingers gently caressed the crystal. Then, from her fingertips burst out 5,000 divine megatons of force. Click, with a crisp sound, the crystal had broken into two halves. The snake goddess and Fuxi frowned. Both were evidently perplexed. That's weird. This crystal couldn't take the power exerted on it, yet it can avoid the attack of energy. How is that helpful? The snake goddess furrowed her brows, puzzled. Staring at the two pieces of the golden red crystal, Fuxi shook his head. Maybe this is not for body refining. You mean it has something to do with descending? The snake goddess's eyes flashed with understanding. Yes, this is possible. Zen has a lot of these crystals. Do you want to take them back first? Fuxi asked. The snake goddess shook her head. Let him keep them first. Our most pressing issue is the loss of the descending rings to the Thunder Dimorphodon. At the mention of the Thunder Dimorphodon, Fuxi's eyes flashed with a hint of killing intent. While the top 10 ancient beasts were quite famous for their strength and prowess, Fuxi was confident he could kill the Thunder Dimorphodon, given the chance. Because the Thunder Dimorphodon had dared to steal the rings right under his nose, Fuxi vowed to never let it go unpunished. After staying at the Pear Hill for 7 days, the flying ships of the Oneness Sky Palace finally left. In case of any emergency, the Pear Hill sent 2 masters to escort the flying ships back to the Bloom Divine Province. After the 7 flying ships arrived at the Bloom Divine Province, Zen took the time to rest well at the Flow Sword Sect. Sally, Hutton and other members of the 9 Li race were also arranged to stay at the Flow Sword Sect as they waited for Ambrose. Happy her husband finally returned, Letitia pounced into his arms. She stayed by his side to hear him talk about what he'd just been through at the chaotic source world. When Zen got to the part about the fight with the evil god, she felt her heart pump faster. She never expected that the man that had been kneeling before Zen in his inner world would have caused so much trouble. Margaret wrinkled her nose at Zen's story. He is such an ungrateful fellow. Why don't you just kill him? Zen smiled, but said nothing. The evil god had gotten involved with too many things. Zen needed more time to figure out how to deal with him. Upon the return of Zen, Milo and others, the other disciples of the Flow Sword Sect looked at them with a new light. According to the rules of the Oneness Sky Palace, any member who had reached the chaotic source realm was no longer an ordinary disciple, but was considered a member of the Land of Sword Grief. They differed from the ordinary disciples, from cultivation-based identity. In the past few days, Zen hadn't gone to the other shore. Instead, he kept throwing divine crystals into the civilization artifact and called out several regal jade statues to temper himself. The truth of godly way, glowing with golden light, integrated with his body in continuous refinement. The spots of light from the chaotic source spirits were constantly nourished thanks to this. Consequently, these spots of light grew at an astonishing speed. Just like Zen, other warriors at the chaotic source realm also tried to strengthen the light spots within their bodies. However, the only effective method to strengthen the chaotic source spirits was continuous import of the other shore power. This was a slow and time-consuming process. It usually took a warrior years of efforts to gain some progress. No one's speed could compare to Zen's. A few days later, this group of disciples who just reached the chaotic source realm gathered at the junction of the Origin Mountain and Oneness Mountain. In front of the junction was a huge, bronze palace, consisting of 3 floors. The terrace on the first floor of the palace was filled with disciples from the Land of Sword Grief, who were at the chaotic source realm. The chaotic source realm was an extremely crucial threshold, and only after passing through it would one be able to go any further. The backbone of any great sect, great force, or any clan was made up of strong warriors at the chaotic source realm. Super forces like the Oneness Sky Palace focused on training such warriors. For example, the Bearing race would send all its members at the chaotic source realm to the Sky Guard Pavilion. As for the Oneness Sky Palace, it was the land of sword grief. The disciples standing in the Bronze Palace turned to glance at the group who had just reached the chaotic source realm. The land of sword grief will receive its new members today, said a long-haired man, who was standing on the first floor of the Bronze Palace. We'll need to share some resources from the land of sword grief with them, alas. A fat man beside the long-haired man sighed loudly. They are just newcomers. How many resources can they take? A short middle-aged man whined. Most of the cultivators in the Bronze Palace had reached the chaotic source realm years ago. They were not strong enough like Athamar, so most of them were still cultivating in the land of sword grief. Upon the group's return from the chaotic source world, Athamar had ordered these disciples to keep their mouths shut about what had taken place in the chaotic source world, especially the fact that Zen had the soaring snake sword. Although many leaders from those great races had clearly seen Zen wield the soaring snake sword, Athamar wanted to at least keep it from the rest of the Oneness Sky Palace. This was for Zen's own safety. This would explain why the disciples in the land of sword grief had no idea what had happened in the chaotic source world. After all the disciples who just reached the chaotic source realm made it to the Bronze Palace, 3 people emerged from its massive bronze gates. The leader of the group was the long-haired man, with a long sword strapped to his back. His eyes flashed fiercely. The long-haired man looked like a serious fellow. With a curt bow, he said, "Congratulations. All of you have made it to the chaotic source realm, and are thus members of our land of sword grief." The crowd all bowed respectfully to the man. "My name is Abdul Fang, from the Bright Mountain." "Nice to meet you, Abdul. I have heard a lot about you." The ones who whispered amongst themselves were actually from the Bright Mountain. Though Abdul Fang ranked at the bottom among the members from the land of sword grief, he was quite famous back in the Bright Mountain. Abdul Fang just nodded slightly at them, remaining serious-faced. "However, you should know that before joining the land of sword grief, each of you need to confirm your rankings." While most of the disciples from the Oneness Sky Palace were aware of the rules of the land of sword grief, Zen blinked confusedly. "Sorry, what do you mean by that?" Zen asked innocently. Abdul Fang cast a cold glare at Zen, a trace of contempt born in his heart. Judging from Zen's white clothes, he figured he must be from the Flow Sword sect. How can this kid know nothing about the rules of our land of sword grief? Chapter 3082, You are not qualified. Although Abdul had a contempt for Zen, his expression did not show it. It can be said that the land of sword grief has gathered most of the resources of the Oneness Sky Palace, he explained patiently. But these resources are not given to good-for-nothing warriors. He said, good-for-nothing warriors emphatically as if his remarks were aimed at the 100 people in front of him. Many of them, including Elvinia, frowned after hearing him say this. Elvinia and Dorothy held high positions in the Oneness Sky Palace, and no one ever dared to speak to them with disrespect up until this moment. They were not pleased. On the other hand, Abdul didn't care about what anyone thought and how they reacted. He turned around and pointed at the Bronze Palace. "There are more than 100 people in the land of sword grief," he said bluntly. "About 30 people on the 3rd floor, 200 on the 2nd floor, and then 900 on the 1st floor. Each of them possesses their own unique rankings." "Excuse us, Abdul," a Bright Mountain disciple spoke. "But when you last returned to the Bright Mountain, you were ranked 630th. I wonder how much you've managed to improve since then." This man was furious, wanting so badly to embarrass him after everything he had said. Upon hearing this, Abdul smirked and responded proudly, "I worked up the ranking in last month's challenge, and I am now ranked 570th. After Abdul bragged, warriors in the crowd began to chatter and whisper among themselves. "Ha ha, I thought he is good especially because he speaks so arrogantly. He's ranked only 570th, and he still stays on the 1st floor. In any case, that means this guy must have stayed on the 1st floor for around 20 years, right? Yes, he stays on the 1st floor, yet he shows off like he's from the 3rd. What a guy." Among the new disciples, many of them were direct descendants of various mountains. Although they were new to the land of sword grief, they knew the rules here all too well. Warriors were treated differently based on the floors they stood on. The disciples on different floors of the land of sword grief also showed the gap in their strengths. Chance, who was also a chaotic source realm warrior, ranked at the bottom on the 1st floor. He had been so harshly defeated by Zen before. Because Abdul was a resident of the 1st floor, the direct descendants naturally looked down upon him. Abdul couldn't take the taunting and disrespect, a look of sudden anger flashing across his face. However, he managed to control his emotions and spoke in a calm voice, "In the land of sword grief, there is a challenge every month. First-timers, like yourselves, all rank at 1117th. However, you can fight one another to get a new ranking. You can also choose an opponent on the first floor to challenge and promote your ranking. As he said this, he paused and looked at them with intent. Please know that the last 100 in the new rankings will not have access to any resources. Abdul looked at the several direct descendants who once laughed at him but now filled with deep anxiousness. Guys, I don't mind if you choose me to be your opponent, he sneered. Although Abdul was on the first floor, he and the others had spent many years wandering in the desire world of the other shore after their cultivation base at the chaotic source realm had stabilized. The other shore tokens they carried were from stage 14 and above. At this point, their strength was something that newcomers could not go against. If that was the case, how could these newcomers be so reckless and cocky to challenge them? They knew too well that most of them wouldn't be able to defeat even the longtime residents of the first floor. While Abdul noticed the newcomers grow silent, his attitude shifted from cocky to demanding. Didn't some of you look down on the warriors of the first floor? What did you just say? He pointed at a disciple from the crowd, a direct descendant of the Azure Mountain. The disciple lowered his head under the pressure that was just put on him by Abdul. How about you? Abdul turned towards another direct descendant. Are you willing to challenge me? Shakily, the direct descendant took a few steps back, trying his best to disappear into the crowd. Other disciples in the Bronze Palace watched and smiled, seeing the newcomers shrivel up to Abdul's presence. Abdul is bullying the newcomers, one pointed out. But there is no better way to deal with them. These disciples just got here, and they're already so conceited. They have no idea that the chaotic source realm is merely a threshold for the other things they will encounter in the future. The disciples in the land of sword grief were all well experienced, so seeing the newcomers come in so proudly disappointed them. They had seen countless arrogant warriors who had suffered much in their first battles. Eventually, Abdul's eyes finally fell on Elvenia. Elvenia was always the apple of everyone's eyes in the Phoenix Palace. She was the most honorable direct descendant. Abdul's goal was to suppress the newcomers, so seeing Elvenia gave him an idea. If he could suppress Elvenia, the other direct descendants would learn to keep their mouths shut. After all, the land of sword grief was not a place for the arrogant warriors to enter just by means of high positions or special identities. Abdul walked up to Elvenia and smiled. So I've heard that you are one of the outstanding warriors of the Phoenix Palace. Why don't you challenge me? Hearing this, Elvenia and Dorothy didn't know how to react. After all, they didn't even care about the resources of the land of sword grief or even the rankings. But hearing this, Elvenia had to think hard. With her current strength, she might not be able to defeat Abdul at the moment. Elvenia frowned at the thought of this and glanced at Zen. Meanwhile, the other disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace also ended up looking at Zen. They had explored the chaotic source world together with Zen, and they were very knowledgeable of Zen's strength and capabilities. If he made the inheritance of world descend, he'd be able to kill a great number of warriors in the land of sword grief. However, Athamar and the leaders of various mountains had given a crucial order that the disciples couldn't bring up what had happened in the chaotic source world. Moreover, almost all of them obtained chaotic source spirits and reached the chaotic source realm with Zen's help. They owed him a lot for his kindness. That was why no one wanted to volunteer Zen for Abdul's challenge. However, everyone still had a little hope that Zen could stand up for them. Seeing everyone look at Zen, Abdul turned around to face him. It seems that everyone wants you to challenge me. Zen looked at Abdul with a calm, composed expression in his eyes. I challenge you, he said, pointing at himself and raising his eyebrows. Dare you? Abdul asked. It's not a matter of whether I dare or not. Zen smirked and put his hands behind his back. You're too weak. You're not even qualified to fight me. Zen didn't intend to join the land of sword grief at all, but he was loyal to the Oneness Sky Palace and their rules. If Abdul hadn't provoked Elvenia, Zen would have just kept silent. But because he was so insistent on challenging Elvenia, how could Zen possibly let this slide? After Abdul heard Zen's response, his face went from arrogant to furious. Just then, a sharp light burst from his eyes like the sword radiance, and shot straight at Zen. The two men behind Abdul looked angry as well. How dare this newcomer speak with such disrespect? Likewise, the disciples in the Bronze Palace were surprised with Zen's confidence. Check this out, a troublemaker appears. I think I've seen that guy. He won first place in the Seven Mountains meeting. So what? If one can't even figure out their real strength, they are bound to suffer. The disciples on the first floor were discussing and debating Zen and his arrogance towards Abdul. By contrast, the disciples on the second floor were much calmer. The first floor and the second floor were completely different. Those who were on the second floor usually had no business in the disputes in the land of sword grief. Therefore, only 20 to 30 warriors on the second floor came out to welcome the new members today. However, at this moment, Zen's words attracted their attention. Chapter 3083, Libby Lee. A white-faced man gazed at Zen with interest. He was on the second floor and was observing the young man. It is said that the disciples of the Flow Sword sect act at their sweet will. I find that to be true, Yusuf. That guy is just like the younger you. Next to him was a strong man named Yusuf Gu, also a member of the Flow Sword sect. Yusuf glared at Zen coldly. Don't take me for a fool. He's just joined the land of sword grief but already has the audacity to challenge Abdul. He's simply an idiot asking for trouble. It was a well-known fact that Abdul was a backbone of the land of sword grief. He'd gotten lucky recently, finding an unparalleled other short token in stage 16. As his strength surged, his ranking also steadily improved. If he played it safe, then he was set to reach the top 200 in the next couple of years and go up to the second floor. The white-faced man laughed at Yusuf's words. I don't think he's that much of an idiot. He didn't say he would challenge Abdul. That young man is actually quite shrewd in my opinion. In his eyes, Zen was a mere cunning newcomer who had no courage to issue a direct challenge to Abdul. Still, it's not wise to piss off someone like Abdul, Yusuf reasoned. Zen came from the Flow Sword sect too and Yusuf had decided to stand up for him if he was bullied. Unfortunately, Zen's words earlier had offended most of the disciples in the land of sword grief. Yusuf didn't think he'd be able to protect him because of that. Abdul was ranked around 500th. The things Zen just said insinuated that nearly half of the disciples were not qualified to challenge him. In all honesty, Abdul never expected Zen to answer him in such a way. His soul of light emitted a sharp aura and charged straight towards Zen. Despite the overwhelming pressure from Abdul's soul power, Zen remained calm and collected, never showing any sort of fear. This placid reaction made Abdul feel strange. Was Zen truly not affected at all? Although he's just reached the chaotic source realm, his soul is no weaker than mine, he thought to himself as he charged. Does he have some sort of magic treasure that lets him withstand soul attacks? Despite his misgivings, Abdul soldiered on. He had to teach Zen a lesson about being disrespectful. Do you want to die? This is the land of sword grief, not the Flow Sword sect. Abdul reminded him. So what? Zen answered with obvious nonchalance. His uncaring reaction made the two disciples behind Abdul livid. These two disciples were from the Ivory Mountain and ranked lower than Abdul. Seeing someone like Zen be rude to their superior irritated them greatly. You brat, you've got a sharp tongue but little to no brains. If you're really capable, why don't you challenge me then? One of them shouted. Yeah, come and challenge me too while you're at it. You have the right to challenge me once. Not one to be outdone, the other disciple also jeered at Zen. It seemed the two were set offering themselves up for a challenge. However, Zen simply gave them an indifferent look. He's not qualified to challenge me. What more the two of you? His words drove the two red with rage. According to the rules of the land of sword grief, veterans were forbidden from fighting with newcomers. Only newcomers were allowed to choose their opponents. Who do you think is qualified? Abdul asked through gritted teeth. Zen simply pointed at the bronze building. Someone inside this bronze building. Please. Abdul held back his anger and went towards the bronze building with the newcomers following behind. He needed to let Zen know the consequences of offending them. As soon as the new disciples entered the first floor, those who were waiting there immediately gathered around and blocked Zen. You'll pay the price for your arrogance, brat. Am I qualified to challenge you? Choose me. Choose me. Choose me. Quote quote. It was plainly obvious that Zen's provocation had angered the land of sword grief's veterans. Almost everyone wanted to challenge him. If you defeat me, I'll pay you 10,000 divine crystals. The prize was a small amount for these disciples. It served as a starting bid as everyone followed suit. If you defeat me, I'll give you 50,000. 100,000. 150,000. I don't care who wins. If you challenge me, I'll give you 200,000. Zen was completely surrounded by the disciples and he didn't know whether he should laugh or cry. Elvinia and Dorothy could only exchange confused looks with each other. Meanwhile, Hyam was laughing. He hadn't expected Zen to be this popular. Even the veterans were offering him divine crystals. Once the bid reached 400,000 divine crystals, Zen finally felt the need to address them. I'm not lacking divine crystals, he said. His battle with the evil god had him consume tens of millions of divine crystals, and he recently used a huge amount to refine his body. 400,000 was too meager of an amount to interest him. Since you aren't lacking divine crystals, how about treasures and weapons? I have an intermediate profound blood treasure. I have a premium profound blood treasure. I've got a sword that is a primary. The disciples were now bringing out all sorts of magic weapons, mainly swords, since they were the known weapons for the Oneness Sky Palace disciples. It was a complete mess. It seemed that as long as Zen chose to challenge them, they would meet all of his requirements. Like Hyam, the newcomers couldn't help but tear up from having to hold back their laughter. Just what kind of reaction would the veterans have once they found out Zen's real strength? Enough, Zen announced, hiding his frustration behind a bitter smile. Realizing that Zen was unwilling to challenge them, the veterans immediately turned hostile. A young man, short in stature, stepped forward. It seems you don't want to choose an opponent. Are you lacking guts? By a month, we'll have the right to challenge you and you won't be able to turn us down. Abdul sneered. This guy's obviously playing with us. He doesn't dare to challenge us at all. Let's go. We'll see how miserable he'll be after a month. Zen couldn't help but roll his eyes. I can challenge you, but first, I want to see the rankings of the Land of Sword Grief. Everyone's eyes lit up. His request made sense. Maybe he wanted to play it smart and choose the people at the bottom of the rankings in hopes that it would increase his chances of victory. It didn't matter though. To them, even the 1115th warrior could take care of Zen effortlessly. This is the ranking stone. Someone in the crowd shouted. The disciples parted and allowed Zen a path towards the said stone. At the end of the hall was a black stone pillar. Someone rubbed his body against the magic array and names suddenly appeared like glowing carvings. There were 116 names on it, since Zen and the other newcomers hadn't been added yet. Right now, they were ranked 1117th. These names were divided into 3 sections. There were a little over 30 names in the first section, those on the 3rd floor, with the top spot taken by someone called Libby Lee. Chapter 3084, Cleon. This Libby should be the strongest warrior in the Land of Sword Grief, Zen thought to himself. His gaze swept across the names on the ranking stone. I have a question. What is it? I can answer your question. Go ahead. The veterans were entirely hospitable, each with their own axe to grind. Can I challenge the warriors on the 2nd floor? Zen asked flatly. The several hundred people on the 1st floor were shocked silent upon hearing the question. What's wrong with him? Many of them wondered. How dare he challenge the warriors on the 2nd floor? Over 100 people resided the entire Land of Sword Grief, and there were only about 200 people on the 2nd floor. The strength of those who had reached the 2nd floor was leaps and bounds beyond that of the 1st floor cultivators. According to the rules, you're not permitted to challenge anyone on the 2nd floor, Abdul explained as he walked up to the ranking stone, pointing to a name on the list. He is the only one qualified to do so. The name read Cleon. He was number 1 on the 1st floor. Excitement flashed across Elvinia's eyes upon seeing Cleon's name. He was Jean's eldest son and Chance's brother, the guy who had been utterly defeated by Zen as a cultivator at the chaotic source realm. I see. Zen nodded slowly, pointing to the first name on the 2nd floor. That is to say, if I want to challenge someone on the 3rd floor, I'd have to defeat the number 1 warrior on the 2nd floor, right? Apart from the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace who had just arrived along with Zen, everyone else fell silent. Most of them stared at Zen like he was an idiot. Is he insane? How dare he even mention challenging someone on the 3rd floor? Who does he think he is? I've been in the Land of Sword Grief for a long time. This is the first time I've seen a newcomer be this cocky. Completing the cultivation in the chaotic source realm involved an extremely long process. The gap between the early, middle, and late stages of cultivation was undeniably wide. The 3 floors of the Land of Sword Grief represented such stages. People on the 3rd floor rarely appeared, they were truly mysterious. Even those disciples who had been in the land for many years had never met them. Once those cultivators made a breakthrough, they had the potential to be chosen as the Oneness governors at any given time. It was a chance to rise up the ranks and rule an entire place, like Athamar and Winchell. Rocco Jung, who ranked first on the 2nd floor, had remained on top for many years. But after being defeated 7 years prior, he never challenged anyone on the 3rd floor again. Over 200 people occupied the 2nd floor. Almost every month, they attempted to challenge Rocco and pull him down from the 1st place, but to no avail. But while Rocco had to suppress all the people on the 2nd floor, no one from the 3rd floor was interested in dueling with him. The difference in strength was just too great. And so everyone was ready to write Zen off as a mere idiot. But suddenly, Zen said, I want to challenge this person. His finger was pointing to the topmost name on the first floor, Cleon. What, you want to challenge Cleon? Abdul practically convulsed. The others stared at Zen in the same light, as they would look upon a monster. If Zen won a fight against Cleon, he could challenge anyone on the second floor. The latter was the target of many duels, after all. But only by those within the top 30 on the first floor. Zen had only entered the land of sword grief. It was all too bold of him to declare a challenge against the first ranker. People thought they might have heard wrong. But Zen finally chose an opponent. Since he was courting death, the veterans didn't mind helping him. Where is Cleon? He seems to be absent these days. I'll tell him someone wants to challenge him. He'll come back, for sure. At the beginning of every month, all disciples in the land of sword grief stayed inside the building, waiting for challenges. But it was already midway through the month when some disciples weren't qualified to challenge others. Some direct descendants then chose to leave. Meanwhile, Cleon and his brother, Chance, had just left the Oneness Mountain. The moment they entered the Dragon City, the jade sword around Cleon's waist trembled, emitting a faint glow. As Cleon gently flicked the jade sword, a strange look came over his face. What's wrong, Cleon? Chance asked worriedly. Someone wants to challenge me. Cleon's tone was curious. You've been on top for the longest time. You must be used to being targeted, Chance returned with a smile. Only when the disciples defeated Cleon could they challenge those on the second floor. On the first floor, he was the most popular, to the point where he had to accept at least one challenge every month. Do you think it's normal for anyone to challenge me now? He asked thoughtfully. After a moment, Chance clasped his hands together. No, the month hasn't just started. They're not qualified to challenge you. For a moment, the other nodded before continuing. Elvenia seems to have returned to the Phoenix Palace. The group of people heading to the chaotic source realm should have returned by now. Chance's eyes widened in disbelief. You mean it's a newcomer who wants to challenge you? Any new arrivals had the chance to challenge anyone upon entering the land of sword grief. But generally, they fought against each other to earn their rankings. Rarely did anyone challenge veterans, even those of the lower ranks. I believe so. Chance's expression looked unreadable. How stupid can a newcomer be to challenge you right off the bat? Throwing a nonchalant glance at Chance, Cleon answered, I don't know if there is any such newcomer. I only know that a disciple from the land of sword grief was defeated by a disciple of the Oneness Sky Palace who hadn't reached the chaotic source realm. What his brother said made Chance look grim. That was an accident, that guy's other sure token. Don't look down upon any enemy, Cleon interrupted him. If I were you, I'd have been pulled down from the first place ages ago. Chance's defeat by Zen's hands still brought him great shame. Because Jean had covered up the fact, only a few people were aware of it. Come on, let's go back to the land of sword grief, Cleon said, his eyes looking sharp and his mouth curling. I'm rather curious about how talented this new guy is and why he dares to challenge me. Once they left the Dragon City, they headed straight for the land of sword grief. For an hour, Zen had waited on the first floor. News of the newcomer challenging Cleon spread quickly. More and more onlookers gathered around. Some disciples who were already out rushed back, and even those practicing in seclusion wanted to see who the arrogant new arrival was. Chapter 3085, 3000 Divine Megatons. The newcomers behind Zen were all nervous and fidgety. Although Zen's strength was unquestionable, it was another matter for him to challenge the strongest warrior on the first floor. Meanwhile, the senior disciples in the land of sword grief were merely waiting for a good show. Abdul observed Zen quietly from the sidelines. For some reason, he had a hunch that something was going to go wrong. A person who was able to survive the chaotic source world and reach the chaotic source realm must be extremely outstanding. But that person shouldn't have done such a stupid thing. Zen looked all too calm as though he was brimming with confidence. It didn't seem like a mask. Even if he was pretending, the fight would expose his true strength. Did he do it for the sake of the new disciples? About an hour later, two figures appeared before the door of the Bronze Palace. Then, Cleon's booming voice came through. Who on earth wants to challenge me? Cleon is back. The senior disciples' eyes flickered in excitement. Abdul stepped forward and cupped one hand in the other, making obeisance to Cleon. Then, he pointed to Zen. It's him. Taking a casual glance at Zen, looking him up and down, Cleon didn't find anything particularly special. But he heard Chance gasp loudly in surprise from beside him. Chance, for heaven's sake! Cleon chastised. But how could Chance not react at all? Never did he expect to see Zen there, let alone find out he was the one who challenged his elder brother. Not long ago, he was defeated by this very man. Because of his failure, he was thoroughly reprimanded by his elder brother, and even mocked by his younger one, Ahmad. Now, Zen had just entered the chaotic source realm. Chance had never thought he would be so bold as to challenge Cleon. Brother, that's Zen Luo, Chance muttered. The revelation had Cleon's eyes slightly widened in surprise. In truth, he never understood how Chance could have been defeated by Zen. Zen's regal jade chessboard, as described by Chance, sounded way too powerful to be real. Never had Cleon heard of such another shore token. But Cleon hadn't expected Zen to be bold enough to challenge him as soon as he reached the chaotic source realm and joined the land of sword grief. After a moment of thought, Cleon smiled gently as he said, "So, you're Zen?" "Yes, that's my name," Zen replied plainly. "You defeated my younger brother, Chance, before you even reached the chaotic source realm. You must be very good." Cleon's tone was flat. His words instantly caused an uproar among the senior disciples in the land of sword grief. What, did I hear that wrong? This guy defeated Chance before reaching the chaotic source realm. On the ranking stone, Chance stood at the 1022nd. It was a rather lagging position, but there were still nearly 100 people below him on the list. That meant that Zen could have defeated the senior disciples at the bottom of the list before reaching the chaotic source realm. The thought had the seniors' faces turn grim. Brother. Cleon's casual mention of Chance's defeat had him rather embarrassed. To keep his defeat a secret, Jean, his mother, had ordered to dismiss all the guards of the Phoenix Palace. This kept the knowledge of his failure limited. But Cleon made it public so easily. Chance wasn't the only one disgraced. But Cleon didn't seem to care about his brother's protest. You did lose, it's a matter of fact. There's no need to hide it. Someone was lucky enough to get some special other shore token. It was luck on his side that let him defeat someone stronger than him. Then, he turned to Zen and bored his gaze into him firmly. I'm afraid you won't be so lucky in front of me. Since you've chosen to challenge me, I won't refuse the fight. But you must be prepared to pay the price. With that, Cleon went straight to the back of the Bronze Palace. When he passed by Abdul, he gave him a pat on the shoulder. Bring him here, he said. The other senior disciples followed Cleon and left the room. Zen and the new disciples were the last to walk out. While the disciples on the second floor looked down upon the first floor disciples, they were rather intrigued to hear of a newcomer challenging Cleon. They wanted to see for themselves if Zen was merely arrogant or if he actually had any formidable strength. Behind the Bronze Palace stood an arena. It was where the disciples of the land in sword grief trained for martial arts. Once Cleon's foot met the ground, he stood in the very center of the arena. Tilting his palm, he gestured for Zen to enter the area. Excitement was building up among the disciples on the first floor. Cleon, make him suffer. He probably can't even take a single punch from Cleon. He's just entered the chaotic source realm. A single punch will be enough to exhaust all the chaotic source spirits in his body. A second punch will smash him into pieces. In the midst of the hubbub, Zen jumped up and confidently took his place on the arena. From there, he saw snake-shaped arrays arranged around them. Noticing how Zen examined the arrays curiously, Cleon said, "This is the first time you've stepped onto the arena. There are some rules I must explain. The other shore tokens of the descending type cannot be used in the land of sword grief." That made Zen frown questioningly. "I can't use any other shore token of the descending type." Seeing Zen's face, Cleon's eyes showed a hint of complacence. Chance had told him what Zen had relied on was the regal jade chessboard. If the statues that descended could grow infinitely, it would be truly terrifying. But if the other shore token was forbidden, Zen would pose no threat to Cleon. Not only the other shore tokens of the descending type, but also those of the mysterious type and the auxiliary type are prohibited. If you attempt to use any of them, you will be rejected by the arrays and in turn, lose the battle, Cleon continued. Got it. Zen nodded once. The standard for joining the land of sword grief rested on reaching the chaotic source realm. Disciples of this realm had to go to the extreme to increase the bearing capacity of their chaotic source spirits. All sorts of incredible abilities were within the other shore tokens. Once they were used, unforeseen consequences were likely to unfold. Naturally, they had been prohibited in the arena. If you got it, then you will lose. Cleon declared as a tremendous aura spread from his body. The other shore power constantly surged out of his inner world, fueling his body. With all the chaotic source spirits activated simultaneously, his aura grew wildly. But it won't really be a shame for you to lose to me. I am number one on the first floor, after all. But unfortunately, you have once humiliated my younger brother, Chance. I won't be showing you any mercy. You're going to suffer what you must. Then, as Cleon stretched out his hand to condense his power, his strike was already on its way to Zen's head. Wow, the palm strike held over 3,000 divine megatons of other shore power. Chapter 3086, Taking the Palm Strike Head On. The moment the senior disciples in the land of sword grief saw the large palm print, a small smile graced their lips. It appeared that Cleon was a nice man as he had patiently explained the rules to Zen, but when the fight began, he showed no mercy. Most disciples from the first floor couldn't withstand the large palm print at all. Given that Zen had just reached the chaotic source realm, this time, the palm print's force could not only drain the chaotic source spirits in his body but also slap him half to death. Despite that, Elvenia, Dorothy, and Hyam weren't so worried at that moment. They knew that what Zen had experienced in the chaotic source world was far worse than Cleon's palm print. Even if he didn't summon a world and activate the inheritance of world, he would still be able to cope with it. Just as the large palm print was about to strike his head, he looked like he wouldn't dodge it. These days, he had constantly summoned the regal jade sculptures to refine his body. He'd summoned from the first sculpture to the 10th to refine his body from the beginning, and the truth of godly way in his physical body was enough to meet the needs of the chaotic source spirits. But as their strength increased, so did their need for the truth of godly way. Therefore, Zen could only summon stronger regal jade sculptures. Later, the regal jade sculptures that he used to refine his body were basically the sculptures from the 10th to the 20th. Recently, he had activated the 20th to the 30th sculptures. His chaotic source spirits were so strong that even when under the siege of those 10 sculptures, they could still hold on for a while. Indeed, the chaotic source spirits in his body had improved by leaps and bounds. Therefore, how could a palm print with merely the force of 3,000 divine megatons possibly hurt him? Whoosh! The huge palm print finally struck down on Zen's head. When Cleon saw Zen simply raise his hands to cover his face, he smiled lazily and muttered, "How naive." Bang! There was a loud thud when the huge palm print hit Zen's skull hard. At that moment, the chaotic source spirits in his body became extremely active. The light dots repeatedly jumped around and at the same time, a golden light circulated around the surface of Zen's body once. Then it entered into his body. It was a fascinating sight, and everyone's eyes were focused on him. Cleon also looked at him in curiosity. After Zen had received such a heavy blow, the chaotic source spirits in his body should be quickly exhausted. While the strong other shore power simultaneously repressed his body, all his internal organs, even the bones and flesh would explode. Most people could foresee such a thing to happen as well. Yet, it didn't happen. Zen still stood there unharmed with a small smile on his lips. It seemed as if he had not been hurt at all. Silence befell around the arena. Those who knew Zen well like Elvenia, Dorothy, Hyam, and some others were also utterly surprised. They were sure that Zen had a way to deal with the huge palm print, but they never expected that he would be able to use his physical body to resist it head-on. They had refined the chaotic source spirits and reached the chaotic source realm on the same day as Zen. It had only been a month. Could it be really true that Zen had already strengthened the chaotic source spirits to such a level in just 1 month? When it came to magic pills and treasures, Elvenia and Dorothy were in no way inferior to Zen. Besides, the Origin Mountain and the Phoenix Palace had taught them some exclusive body refining methods which specialized in the cultivation on the chaotic source spirits. Such body refining methods, however, were barely different from each other, so the speed of their improvement was almost about the same. Even then, Zen's progress was way beyond the others' imaginations. If Dorothy, Elvenia, and the rest of them were all shocked, then more so the senior disciples in the land of sword grief, whose eyes were wide as saucers. Most especially Chance and Abdul, who almost dropped their jaws. Chance had been so eager to see the time when Cleon could slap Zen to death with that huge palm print, as it would relieve the hate he felt. He was pleased when Zen didn't dodge Cleon's attack, as it was exactly what he wanted to see. But, the result was totally different from what he had imagined. As for Abdul, he couldn't speak nor move. His eyes just stared in shock. He had been in the land of sword grief for such a long time, but he could only achieve a strike with 2,500 divine megatons of force at most. The force of the palm strike that had hit Zen was much greater than the strike Abdul could launch. In other words, Abdul realized that he could never defeat Zen, even if the latter just stood still and let him beat his body as he liked. Although Abdul did not come to the arena to fight himself, what he saw was like a hammer that pounded his heart. He was absolutely crushed. On the second floor, the warrior with the white face and his burly companion, Yusuf, were also taken aback. Aside from being astounded, Yusuf also felt a little excited. "Do you still think he is stupid now?" asked the warrior with a white face. A deep sigh came out from Yusuf's lips. "It seems that there is another remarkable figure in the Flow Sword sect after me," he said with a laugh. "Don't blow your own trumpet," the white-faced man said and glared at him. "You had stayed on the first floor for a long time back then. This man just came to the land of sword grief, yet he is able to challenge Cleon. Can you even compare to such a freak?" Forget about Yusuf. Perhaps in the whole history of the land of sword grief, there had never appeared such a figure. In turn, Yusuf immediately kept quiet upon hearing what the warrior with a white face said. After a moment of silence, the crowd began to discuss among themselves. What happened? Did Cleon hold back his strength? It's impossible. The other shore power the giant palm print has released is at least 3,000 divine megatons, and Cleon used 80% of his strength. But that guy didn't move a bit. Logically, 3,000 divine megatons of force is enough to crush him into pieces, right? How should I know? Meanwhile, Cleon stood in the arena with his right hand still in the position of launching the palm strike. His eyes were full of disbelief, as if he was in front of a monster and not a warrior. "Please, go on," said Zen, who stretched his hand and made the same gesture as Cleon's. At that point, Cleon even suspected that Zen had used some special other shore token which blocked the attack for him. However, there was no way to use the magical powers of any other shore token in that arena. If Zen attempted to do so, it would activate the arrays around the arena and he would have been kicked out already. The arrays were not activated, which meant that Zen had relied on himself to take the attack. "Go on," Cleon hissed. His eyes flashed coldly at his opponent. Cleon had held back a little of his strength. After all, it would be troublesome if he had accidentally killed Zen. Now, he decided to strike with his full power. He flipped his hands, and numerous large palm prints began to take shape and circle around Zen. The palm prints intertwined to form a dangerous killing trap. Experienced other shore realm warriors knew that one should get out of those large palm prints immediately, but Zen did not intend to escape at all. Instead, he just let himself be trapped. Smash him! A killing intent flashed in Cleon's eyes. He flipped his palm, and the many palm prints swept over Zen. Even if Zen had a special way that helped him to resist his palm strike just now, the chaotic source spirits inside his body would eventually be exhausted. Now that he launched a continuous attack of his palm prints, Zen's chaotic source spirits would be worn out at a faster rate. He didn't believe that Zen's chaotic source spirits were different, unlike anything he had ever seen. Chapter 3087, Ranking First on the First Floor. The truth was that Zen's chaotic source spirits were indeed no different from the others. What actually set him apart from the rest was the truth of godly way contained in his physical body. It was known that the chaotic source spirits of all the powerful chaotic source realm warriors could not bear an infinite amount of power forever. Of course, Zen's couldn't as well. However, the truth of godly way formed from his body could quickly nourish the chaotic source spirits. Not only could it strengthen them, but it could also immediately stop them from being fatigued. Bang, bang, bang. Every time a large palm print exploded on Zen, the golden light around his body flashed, and the chaotic source spirits absorbed the aura of the truth of godly way. In the past month, Zen had endured such attacks day and night. The difference lay in the fact that using the regal jade statue's attacks required a lot of divine crystals, while Cleon's attacks were free. The palm strikes continued, and his body was tossed higher and higher. The palm prints formed one after another, attacked his body, and then dispersed. The audience's eyes were fixed on Zen, who was flying up in the air. They hoped to see his body be torn into pieces and thoroughly disintegrated, but it never happened. Haven't his chaotic source spirits been exhausted yet? A man with a dark and sallow face uttered in astonishment. This sallow-faced man was ranked 19th on the first floor and could be considered as a top warrior in the land of sword grief. According to his assessment, he estimated that 4 palm strikes from Cleon was enough to exhaust the chaotic source spirits in his body. In other words, he could take the 4 palm attacks from Cleon head-on, but after that he would definitely be defeated. As of now, Cleon's series of large palm prints had slapped Zen more than 10 times, but the latter was still unharmed. Has this guy really just reached the chaotic source realm? Cleon thought in confusion. Bang, bang, bang. Cleon's eyes gleamed with amazement, even as he continued to rain a barrage of attacks on Zen. He had almost activated his strength to the limit. The other shore token that Cleon fused with was from stage 18. It could unleash as much as 5,000 divine megatons of force, but the bearing capacity of Cleon's physical body was limited. If he activated 5,000 divine megatons of power in one go, it would be difficult for his chaotic source spirits to bear it. Whenever Cleon launched a palm attack, he released 500 divine megatons of power. It was clearly less than the token's full force, but the chaotic source spirits in his body got slightly weak and exhausted. If things went on like that, he might not be able to withstand his own actions anymore, let alone destroy Zen's chaotic source spirits. Naturally, he would be ashamed if he lost to a warrior who had just reached the chaotic source realm. As Cleon thought of it, he gritted his teeth and went all out. He proceeded to unleash more power from the other shore token. Swoosh, 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 he condensed 3 colossal palm prints again, and shot them towards Zen, who was in the air. While he launched the 3 large palm prints, he took a deep breath, and the light dots of the chaotic source spirits in his body died out one by one. Those chaotic source spirits had been completely exhausted. After he lost the chaotic source spirit's support, he didn't dare activate the other shore token anymore. Otherwise, his body would collapse before he could even release the power. 3 palm strikes are already Cleon's limit. If those 3 moves can't defeat Zen, then Cleon would lose. I'm afraid that guy will create a record. The warriors who had stayed in the land of sword grief for a long time could see that Cleon had already reached his limit. He was now like a spent arrow. As soon as the 3 palm prints charged straight towards Zen, he changed his posture in the air, which made the shade stone liquid inside his body disperse to his bones. It was prohibited to use special abilities of other shore tokens in the battle arena, but since the shade stone liquid was a part of Zen's body, then it shouldn't be a problem. The moment he had adjusted his position, the 3 palm prints came at him. Bang, 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 the horrifyingly violent other shore power hit his body and spread out. The space around him shook constantly, like an empty house in a hurricane's eye. The force of those palm strikes would have torn a normal space apart. Needless to say, it was obvious that there was something used to stabilize the space in the battle arena. So, the space around the arena shook violently and then eventually became steady. Despite having endured 3 palm attacks, Zen's physical body was as stable as before. Just then, he lightly tapped in midair like a nimble bird, and landed gently on the arena afterwards. He looked at Cleon with calm eyes. He did not do anything. Meanwhile, Cleon's chaotic source spirits had gotten exhausted, and now he could not withstand a single blow. There was nothing else he could do, and he just glared at Zen with great displeasure. Finally, he pulled a long face and stood in front of his opponent, unwilling to admit defeat. You don't want to admit defeat? Do you want to wait for the chaotic source spirits to recover? Asked Zen. I lost, Cleon stammered. When he admitted that he lost, the newcomers burst into cheers. Zen's triumph over Cleon, however, had nothing to do with those newcomers. They still had to compete with each other and determine the rankings. The newcomers were certainly displeased by the attitudes of the senior disciples in the land of sword grief, and it was Zen who had helped them to vent out their resentment. Zen glanced at Abdul, who stayed under the platform, and asked, "Do you think you are qualified to challenge me?" Zen had effortlessly beaten the warrior who ranked first on the first floor. Indeed, a disciple who was ranked over 500th wasn't qualified to challenge him. Abdul stood there stiffly and shook his head when Zen's cold gaze stared straight at him. As for Chance, he was even more dejected. After all, the fact that he had lost to Zen always made him miserable. The fact that Zen had defeated his brother after a few months just added salt to the wound. Did fate send this guy to torture them? On the other hand, the warriors who belonged to the first floor of the land of sword grief still stood there in amazement. The way they looked at Zen had completely changed. The strength he had just shown didn't seem like it was at its limit. Furthermore, he had endured Cleon's attacks without making a move. How terrifying could he be if he fought back? With such a level of strength, he could break through to the second floor completely. Buzz. At that moment, the ranking stone's light flashed, and the rankings had changed. Cleon's name was forcefully pushed behind Zen's, while Zen now ranked first on the first floor. A new record was formed. On the first day of entering the land of sword grief, that warrior has managed to make his ranking go up by 116 places, and directly rank first on the first floor. His promotion is even faster than that of Libby, a disciple muttered. He was absolutely floored when he saw the prompt beside Zen's name. I've heard that this guy has performed very well and made a splash at the Seven Mountains meeting. I really didn't expect, another disciple muttered and looked at the ranking stone, completely dumbfounded. Everyone in the land of sword grief paid close attention to the change in the ranking stone, which was the evidence of their strength. When the disciples in the land of sword grief saw the change in Zen's ranking, many of them suddenly thought of Libby, who was the #1 warrior in the entire land of sword grief. Chapter 3088, The New Record. As the land of sword grief's top warrior, Libby had also chosen a senior disciple to challenge when she first arrived. Her ranking had gone up to the 300th right after that battle. It used to be an unprecedented record. But today, this fact changed. Never did anyone imagine that Zen could easily break that record. Some disciples even believed that if it weren't for the rules of the land of sword grief, Zen could easily challenge a second-floor disciple right away and ascend to the second floor on his first day. After Zen left the arena, he quietly retreated to the side. All the newcomers had to challenge at least one opponent after reaching the land of sword grief to gain new rankings. Many newcomers challenged each other as the rankings on the stone constantly shifted. Among these newcomers were some warriors who could fight against the low-ranking senior disciples. Dorothy, Elvenia, Milo, and Hyam were among such competent warriors. But to be cautious, they chose not to challenge any senior disciples just yet. Over 100 people chose their own opponents and quickly carried out the one-on-one battles. The number of names on the ranking stone continued to grow. As expected, Hyam, Elvenia, and Dorothy ranked between the 1117th and 1125th. But these rankings were merely temporary. If one had extraordinary talent like Milo and Hyam, they could easily make rapid progress. Surpassing the Lust World, arriving at the Desire World and carrying the new Other Shore tokens, most especially, promoted a quick rise in the rankings. About 6 hours later, all the new disciples' rankings had been decided. And so the land of sword grief assigned everyone to their respective training rooms based on the rankings. Once they entered the land of sword grief, the warriors received their monthly salaries from the Oneness Sky Palace. They were no longer disciples, but officials of the Oneness Sky Palace. So long as they made steady progress, they could become influential top warriors. As officials, they received proper compensation. Salaries were decided according to their training room numbers. The salary for the warrior of the first room was special and offered according to the second floor standards, so everyone was naturally envious of it. As soon as Zen settled down in the first room, the top 30 warriors had immediately decided to exercise their right to challenge Zen at the beginning of the next month. Although Cleon was thoroughly defeated, many people were making speculations about Zen and believed they could take him down. Zen didn't look particularly powerful, after all. Just as the first floor seniors did, many warriors on the second floor were already paying close attention to Zen. At the beginning of the next month, Zen had the right to challenge them too. Now, his target was probably on the second floor, since he was already ranked first on the first floor. But who would he choose to duel? On the first day, many newcomers had settled in. The disciples of the land of sword grief were all busy. They were either heading off to the Dragon City to get tasks or training on the other shore. Normally, disciples were regularly heading in and out of the Bronze Palace. And on their way, they'd take a look at the ranking stone. Rankings on the stone generally changed at the beginning of every month. As it was only in the middle of this month, most people paid particular attention to the new disciples. What happened? A middle-aged man clad in black suddenly exclaimed in front of the stone. Some of the disciples next to him didn't seem fazed by his reaction. Once Zen's name appeared, every person who happened to pass by the stone expressed some reasonable shock and disbelief. What Cleon has been surpassed? This name on top isn't familiar at all. The man continued to yell. Well, he is a newcomer, after all, someone responded. How is it possible? The newcomers only just arrived today. Am I blind or is something wrong with the stone? It would be hard to believe the fact without seeing it with their own eyes. You can consider it a mistake if you wish, said the man beside him, his lips curling strangely. The middle-aged man clad in black took a moment of thought in front of the ranking stone before leaving. Realizing he had missed a wonderful battle, he hurried off to learn more about the story. Another 3 came in after him. Taking a look at the ranking stone, they were just as shocked as the man who came in before them. Dang it, what happened today? Did we miss something? He's a newcomer, isn't he? New names were only added to the ranking stone every 10 years. Naturally, most people could tell that Zen was a newcomer at a glance. The several disciples guarding the ranking stone looked uneasy. All they could do was to briefly explain the matter before sending the 3 guys away. It was expected that all the disciples of the land of sword grief would be greatly surprised after seeing the ranking stone. Of course, Cleon was the most displeased. he wasn't in the mood to cultivate at all, that day. Instead, he stood by the door of the second training room and quietly observed all the people get amazed by the ranking stone. Someone had surpassed him beyond imagination, and he couldn't shake off the feeling of dejection. From the outside, the Bronze Palace's training rooms looked very small. But their interior area was as spacious as a palace. Zen hadn't planned to stay in the land of sword grief for very long, and he'd have preferred to stay in his courtyard house of the Flow Sword sect. But it wasn't appropriate for him to leave so soon, as he had just arrived there, after all. After night fell, Zen pulled out the regal jade chessboard and let the regal jade statues descend for his training. The battle with Cleon did not turn out as easy as he thought it would. While the strength of his chaotic source spirits already seemed overbearing, he was still at the primary stage of the chaotic source realm. The gap between him and Cleon was undeniable. But Zen could still use his truth of godly way to ease the fatigue of the chaotic source spirits. The endless truth of godly way and the chaotic source spirits formed a unique closed loop, extending the lasting time of the chaotic source spirits to a great extent and easing their fatigue. The two complemented each other, doubling the power that could be produced. The next morning, two stewards of the land of sword grief knocked on the newcomers' training rooms and told them to enter the other shore. After reaching the chaotic source realm, one should be well prepared to break through to the desire world. As the stewards informed the disciples, they realized that there was one missing. When they felt confused, they discovered that this disciple was actually in the first room at the far right of the first floor, which surprised them so much. Chapter 3089, Get Ready. After receiving the notice from the two stewards, Zen headed back to his cultivation room. In his room, he recited a truth of godly way, and his soul of light immediately returned to the other shore. The newcomers in the other cultivation rooms also gathered themselves in stage 13 of the other shore. But what Elvinia was going through was different from all the others. When her soul of light had left the other shore, her body remained in the stronghold of the Oneness Sky Palace. As she finally entered the other shore, her eyes began to flutter and open in the stronghold. She got up and carefully examined her body, trying to familiarize herself before walking outside. At this time of the day, many disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace had gathered together. Some gasped and others whispered when seeing Elvinia walking out. Few people knew that she had a physical body at the other shore. So they were much surprised seeing she walk out like a creature at this place. In fact, she had so many options to cover up her identity. For instance, she could wear a veil to hide her face. However, people from the Bearing race and other races had already seen her, so there was no point to hide. A lot of newcomers of the land of sword grief had arrived. Surprisingly, even Sally, Hutton and other 9 Li warriors had gathered here too. But for some reason, Hyam was nowhere to be found. Yesterday, he had entered the other shore in advance after the intense fights in the land of sword grief. On the other shore, he had descended from stage 13 down to stage 4 to obtain some necessary resources for their breakthrough to stage 14. More than an hour had passed and people could finally spot Hyam heading towards them. "I'm sorry to have worried everyone," said Hyam with a smile. The space ring in his hand began to glimmer, from which dark gold wheels started to appear. "Although you have already reached the chaotic source realm, you still need a matchable other shore token to become a real chaotic source realm warrior," he explained. "Once in stage 14, you should fuse with a new one. Only then will you have the real strength of the chaotic source realm. If all of this is accomplished, you won't have any more problems in challenging others in the land of sword grief. These cloud-flying wheels are the key to ascend to stage 14. Lucky for you guys, I'll be giving one to each of you." The people he was addressing were all newcomers to the chaotic source realm. The thing that separated them and those high-level ones at the same realm was, in fact, the other shore token. Apart from Zen, Elvinia and Dorothy, the rest of the people's other shore tokens only had no more than 1,000 divine megatons of force. To fuse with better other shore tokens was something they needed to do now. As Hyam was distributing the cloud-flying wheels one by one, Zen asked in a low voice, "Can I have one more of this?" A smile graced Hyam's blurry face. He then held out 2 cloud-flying wheels and handed them to Zen. As he finished distributing the wheels, Hyam turned back and took out finger-sized chunks of soul crystal. The Oneness Sky Palace had spent heavily at this point in time. It had taken out almost all the soul crystal it had accumulated over the years. The reason was simple: the closing of the chaotic source world meant that there would be no new chaotic source realm warriors in the future. The Oneness Sky Palace had used all its resources on the last batch of chaotic source realm warriors. The sight of the crystal excited many disciples. They began absorbing the soul crystal as soon as they got it. After they had gotten ready, they all left for the other end of stage 13. They didn't see many souls of light along the way. If a person managed to step in stage 13, he or she had already been taken to the chaotic source world last time. Those who couldn't enter the chaotic source world belonged to minor sects or weak forces. After the members of many super forces returned to their own races, they began to enter stage 14 all at once. This was not the case for Zen, though. He and his companions had been delayed for a few days at Pear Hill. In fact, they might be the last batch of people heading to stage 14. As they passed by the dark region, Zen kept looking into the darkness. Likewise, Elvenia concentrated and watched very carefully. She whispered to Zen, "Do you think the three-eyed boy is still in there?" Zen nodded, "Yes, I think so. The last time they were there, they were forced by the three-eyed boy to make countless candles. But then accidentally, Elvenia became a purified being while Zen inherited the civilization artifact. For some reason, the three-eyed boy seemed to be against blood assembly. Zen had no clue if they would ever come across each other again. Meanwhile, Dorothy had only been listening to their whispers, but kept silent. She seemed quite down. Since she and Zen had entered the other shore, the two had had some secrets to one another that others were clueless to. However, after the events that unfolded in the dark region, Elvenia suddenly became involved. On the other end of stage 13, there were many huge, scattered temples. Most of the temples had already been explored, and each of them recorded a civilization of the past. Hence, the group of Zen merely passed these temples and continued to move forward. The darkness on both sides continued to spread out towards the center of the road, making it a narrow belt. It seemed that the narrowest place was 5 feet wide. Twitter, twitter, hiss. The creatures that roamed in the darkness seemed to be moving. At one point, they even began to hear some voices. This brought chills down their spines. The road seems to be growing narrower by the minute. The dark region is expanding fast. It's only a matter of time until this road is completely consumed by darkness. What if the creatures in the dark region begin to rush out at us? Sally asked, holding on to Hutton's clothes tightly. Nothing frightened her more than being killed in stage 13. Noticing the fear in her, Hyam reassured them, "Don't be afraid, everyone. The dark region is forbidden to us, as much as the light region is forbidden to the creatures in the dark region. If they come here, they will die for sure." "That's right," Zen agreed. "We'll be fine." However, just as Zen finished speaking, several tentacles suddenly squirmed from the dark region beside him. They began to make their way towards the light, and for some reason, were unharmed. These tentacles belonged to a plant, and its dark green skin could tolerate the light region for a short while. Hiss hiss hiss. The tentacles had begun to melt gradually in the light. But before they could completely melt, they had already wrapped themselves around Zen's neck and dragged him to the dark region. "Ah, look, Zen, watch out." The others, who had just been reassured of their protection in the light, had no idea what to do. And even if they did have a plan, it might not have been enough to save Zen in time. "Go to perdition." Just then, Elvenia moved quickly and waved her hands at the sky, shedding bright light to the dark region. The demon plant screamed in agony, twisting and hissing madly from the effect of Elvenia's light. Just like that, the plant had completely melted. Though Zen's soul of light had been dragged into the dark region, the light led by Elvenia protected him from further damage. Chapter 3090, The Energy Vortex. Though it was a false alarm, the disciples who witnessed what happened couldn't help but feel frightened. They tried to huddle together in the very narrow path. But Zen remained calm. After all, he had stayed in the dark region for a period of time and already knew how dangerous it was. Moreover, they had Elvenia, who was a purified being, by their side. They could even roam the dark region freely if they wanted to. Zen stood up and returned to the path. When he felt the fear among the disciples, he smiled and said, "You see, the creatures in the dark region are no match for Princess Elvenia. Everyone, please go first. I'll protect you," Elvenia announced. The disciples just nodded and mentally sighed. Many talented warriors had come forth among this generation in the Oneness Sky Palace. There were so many talents that even a genius like Milo, who was capable of instant enlightenment, was not considered outstanding among them. As for Zen, he had been making miracles in both the chaotic source world and the land of sword grief. On the other hand, Elvenia, who was considered as mediocre in the source world, was quite invincible on the other shore. She was incredibly skilled in killing the creatures in the dark region so easily, which was unheard of. The disciples lined up in a straight line and continued to move forward on the narrow path, while Elvenia stayed behind to protect them. Perhaps, Elvinia's ability shocked the creatures in the dark region. The roars that echoed in the dark region had completely died down. They didn't encounter any attacks along their way anymore. After they walked along the narrow path for about 10 minutes, the path finally became wide and a stone platform appeared in front of them. This stone platform was the edge of the Lust World. The sky in the distance seemed to be washed with various colors of water. It was quite a sight to behold. Among the many hues was a small black hole, where all the colors apparently came from. The energy contained in those flowing colors is so unique, said Zen as he gazed into the horizon. He could clearly perceive the energy within those colors. It was extremely powerful and similar to the waves blending energy, but they differed in aura. Dorothy stared at the colors and said, "It is said that it's the energy of the other shore. It is the one that forms the 33 stages, little by little." The energy of the 33 stages? Zen repeated, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "Yes, that's true," Hayam said with a nod. "But we can't use the energy, so no one has ever studied it," he added. "Hayam, is that vortex the place we are going to pass through?" Sally asked as she walked beside them. "Yes," Hayam confirmed. "Now that we have arrived at the destination, we can advance to stage 14. We can't help each other from now on. We can only rely on ourselves and the cloud-flying wheels in your hands. Mind the colorful ribbons, as they are actually an extremely powerful flow of energy. Once you are sucked in, no one would be able to save you," he explained. When he finished, everyone felt their hearts sink in their chests. They were lucky enough to reach the chaotic source realm, but it did not mean that their troubles were over. They were still weak souls of light on the other shore, after all. "Who goes first?" Hayam asked. The disciples fell into silence. To be fair, it was their first time to experience such a thing, and the ones who went first would clearly face the biggest risks. "Me," a man said as he stepped out. It turned out to be Milo, a disciple of the Flow Sword sect. "Milo, please," said Hayam with his cupped hands. Milo did not feel any fear for what he must endure. In a few moments, he stood on the edge of the stone platform and activated the cloud-flying wheel in his hand. A thick cloud appeared as the cloud-flying wheel rotated continuously in his palm. At the same time, a force was exerted on his soul of light, which pushed him straight out of the stone platform and sent him flying in the air. Milo's figure flew higher and higher, until he was just like a tiny black dot to everyone below. Still, they could see his location through the white cloud that the cloud-flying wheel had created. Eventually, the white cloud approached the colorful vortex. The closer one got to the vortex, the more dangerous it was for them. Therefore, Milo controlled the cloud-flying wheel to carefully swirl amidst the energy ribbons. Soon enough, he arrived at the center of the vortex. He felt as if an invisible gravitational force pulled him in, and then he was suddenly sucked into the vortex. "The next one," said Hayam after Milo disappeared in the energy vortex. Once the disciples saw how smoothly Milo went into the vortex, they felt braver and more encouraged. Another disciple took out his cloud-flying wheel and directly flew towards the energy vortex. Zen observed them for a while, and then retreated to the back of the line and handed his cloud-flying wheel to Dorothy. Other warriors only needed to fly to the Desire World once, while Zen needed to do it twice. His corporeal body also needed the cloud-flying wheel. "Do you need me to pick you up?" Elvinia asked Zen with concern after Dorothy had put the cloud-flying wheel away. Although Zen's corporeal body was much stronger than his soul of light, it was quite dangerous for him to go through the narrow path. Elvinia was worried about him. "No, it's not dangerous for me," Zen said confidently. Then, he disappeared on the other shore. When Zen was gone, Elvinia and Dorothy exchanged knowing looks. It was as if they could read each other's minds. Their strained relations surfaced. "We can't look down on Zen, can we?" Dorothy said. Elvinia blinked a few times. "Are you upset, because you can't help Zen?" she asked. A pink flush crept on Dorothy's cheeks at Elvinia's words. "No, I just don't think Zen is that incompetent," she immediately explained. "Oh, I see," said Elvinia in an aloof voice. "You are jealous." Quote. Dorothy didn't know what to say. "I guessed it right," Elvinia said calmly, and then continued, "I heard that you knew Zen before he came to the Source World. He joined the Oneness Sky Palace with your help. Of course, there were many factors that caused Zen to join the Oneness Sky Palace, but the most important part was that Dorothy had acted as a go-between for him in the Sea of Truth. But there's one thing you need to understand. Zen doesn't belong only to you," said Elvinia. It was true that Elvinia was a cold woman, but she was always straightforward and honest. Chapter 3091, Trust. Following her sojourn into the dark region with Zen, Elvinia's personality changed slightly, but not by much. She just became gentler toward Zen. She was still indifferent to everyone else, especially Dorothy when they were alone. "I never said Zen belonged to me," Dorothy retorted, feeling even more embarrassed. "But you were even willing to sacrifice your life for him. Why would you go that far if you don't want him to be yours?" Elvinia spoke. In the chaotic source world, Dorothy had used the heart of accomplice regardless of the consequences. Elvinia had been floored by that. She never realized she had such a terrifying other shore token. "I had no choice. The situation called for it," Dorothy pointed out, a little annoyed. Her patience was growing thin. Elvinia felt smug seeing Dorothy so flustered. She asked her the next question bluntly. "Do you like him?" Dorothy was once again rendered speechless. She paused before replying, "That is none of your business." Unexpectedly, Elvinia leaned forward and hissed in Dorothy's ear. "Of course it's my business. He belongs only to me." Dorothy was stunned, but being used to Elvinia's straightforward manner, she responded just as frankly, "He already has a family." "So what?" Elvinia straightened up. She now possessed the body of a purified being created through imagination. It was even more perfect than her previous body in the chaos. It radiated a different charm. She looked up at the large vortex in the distance. "That is his past. I am talking about the future." Dorothy frowned at Elvinia's apparent conviction. She didn't know what Elvinia was thinking. But from what she knew of Zen, he would never just put his past behind him. "What makes you so sure of that?" Dorothy asked slowly. Elvinia ignored Dorothy and put on a cold face, as usual. At the very beginning, Elvinia did hate Zen. However, after their travel in the dark region and having regained her memory, she gradually became interested in him. In the Phoenix Palace, Elvinia was able to chat with her 3 disciples, mostly about Zen's past. Lavender, who was a woman of few words, had spent the longest time with Zen. But one thing they had in common was when they were talking about Zen, their faith in him was evident. This level of trust shone clearly on their faces. Elvinia's tragic experiences in the divine lair made her regard everything around her with hostility and indifference. Even with Flamen consoling her all these years, her trauma wouldn't heal, and nothing could make her happy. She wanted what was lacking in her life. Elvinia suddenly found herself envying how Laquisha and the others looked so happy and trusting when they spoke of Zen. Once the envy took root, the desire for that kind of happiness grew uncontrollable and became a mad obsession. When they were at the chaotic source world, Elvinia finally felt, too, that Zen was a person she could trust unconditionally. She liked the feeling of being able to trust someone that deeply. As the women were caught in their discussion, Hyam busied himself with something else. Soon enough, the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace took the cloud-flying wheels and flew away, one by one. Not long after, Zen's physical body arrived at the destination, having crossed stage 13 on the other shore. Dorothy silently walked up to Zen and handed him another cloud-flying wheel. After that, Zen let his physical body dissipate. He returned to the other shore with his soul of light. By this time, more than half of the disciples from the Oneness Sky Palace had already gone. Zen held the cloud-flying wheel in his hand and walked toward the edge of the stone platform. Dorothy and Elvinia followed behind him in silence. They intended to go with him. Zen's gaze fell on Elvinia. The purified being dominates a certain stage. After a living creature on the other shore becomes a purified being, they can only stay at that stage. "I wonder if you can leave." Creatures on the other shore were fixed at the stage they were in after becoming purified beings. Zen had learned this from Athamar. However, Elvinia was an exception. She was not a being on the other shore, so Zen didn't know whether she would be limited by this rule. Elvinia blinked at this. "I have asked my father. He also wants me to try to see if I can reach stage 14. It would be a good thing for the Oneness Sky Palace if Elvinia could dominate only stage 13. But if she could continue to be promoted and reach other stages, it would be a new record that could make others uneasy. A purified being who could grow and become more powerful was enough to change the structure of many forces on the other shore. In that case, you can wait here, Zen said. Why? Elvinia asked. Zen's gaze passed over Elvinia and landed on the place where his physical body disappeared. Elvinia immediately understood. Although Zen was not a purified being, he could also reach the other shore with his physical body. After all, Zen needed to cross twice. Elvinia could wait for Zen and complete the crossing with Zen the second time. I'll wait for you, then, Elvinia said, nodding at Zen's explanation. The other disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace were somewhat puzzled when they heard this. Zen was obviously here, Why would Elvenia still wait for him? Perhaps only Hyam, Dorothy and a few other warriors understood. Soon after, Zen and Dorothy activated the cloud flying wheels in their hands. As a cloud of mist rose, Zen's soul of light flew in the air, followed by Dorothy's. After they flew out for some distance, Zen looked back. From this vantage, he could clearly see the layout of stage 13 of the other shore. It was like a huge island, with the dark region spreading from its flanks like dark clouds. Below stage 13's lower edges, many thin lines extended down. Zen surmised all these lines must be connected to the star doors of stage 12. But from this angle, Zen could not see where it was. Just then, Zen suddenly thought of the space where King Manard was. Although King Manard considered the space to be the second other shore, it was not that large. It was incomparable to the real other shore. To create the 33 stages in the chaos was truly a magnificent feat. Zen, be careful, Dorothy reminded him. Just as Zen turned around to look, a colorful energy ribbon darted toward him. He gently turned over the cloud flying wheel in his hand. As a puff of mist spread around, he easily dodged the ribbon. It was not difficult to enter the energy vortex. He could enter it as long as he was careful. All the disciples who ascended earlier had been sucked into the energy vortex successfully, but it was hard to say whether they were able to pass through it. When Zen and Dorothy got closer to the vortex, a strong gravitational force started to pull them in. The force was so strong that resistance was futile. The closer they got to the vortex, the greater the gravitational force became. Swoosh, swoosh, both of them were sped along faster and faster in the air until they were sucked into the vortex. Chapter 3092, Dorothy's Affection. There was a long and narrow channel inside the energy vortex, and the colored energy bands coiled around each other like pythons. The wind beat Zen's and Dorothy's faces as they moved and flew through the channel at an extremely fast speed. The cloud flying wheels helped them adjust their direction, although it was a bit hard because of their highly swift pace. At that moment, several energy bands in the distance abruptly rolled up. They looked like several pythons jumping and curling around. Be careful on your right. Follow me, Zen told Dorothy, who was behind him. In turn, Dorothy tilted the cloud flying wheel to the right, and both of them leaned towards the left of the channel. After both of them had adjusted their positions, they successfully brushed past the energy bands without colliding into them. Left, Zen shouted. The two of them quickly flew to the right. The mist clouds their cloud flying wheels released formed long white lines in the energy channel. Since Zen had warned Dorothy in advance, they passed several dangerous spots safe and sound. Dorothy held onto the cloud flying wheel tightly and quietly followed behind Zen. Her gaze swept across the brightly colorful energy bands around her as she lost herself in her thoughts. Ever since Elvenia had arrived in their group, she had never been with Zen alone like this. As soon as she realized it, she began to reminisce and miss the days she had spent in the Sea of Truth. I hope this is a very long channel, she thought to herself. Just then, a flurry of ripples showed up over the energy channel. Several thick energy bands came down. Zen was also shocked when he saw these thick energy bands, but he didn't think it would be a problem for them to use the cloud flying wheels to dodge them. Just as he adjusted the cloud flying wheel and began to fly downward, he suddenly felt that something was amiss behind him. Dorothy seemed to be absent-minded, as she was flying forward in a blank manner and did not descend like he did. Dorothy, he shouted as he immediately turned the cloud flying wheel around. His entire body spiraled upwards, and the white mist spun around his body in circles. As soon he got close enough to Dorothy, he grabbed her with one hand and seized her cloud flying wheel with the other. Mist sprayed out from the two cloud flying wheels, while Zen and Dorothy fell straight downwards. They still got to dodge the energy bands above their heads, but because they fell quite fast, they were dashing to the lower wall of the energy vortex at full speed. Dorothy was scared silly that she huddled in Zen's arms, totally motionless. When Zen saw that they were approaching the lower wall of the energy vortex even faster, he gritted his teeth and aligned the two cloud flying wheels right downwards. If they hit the lower wall, they would definitely die. Wow! More clouds and mists puffed out and acted as a buffer to weaken their downward momentum. The moment Zen was only half a foot away from the lower wall, they finally stopped falling and began to float gently. Wow, that was so close! Zen exclaimed and sighed in relief. How could you space out at such a time? He scolded. Dorothy, however, just stayed limp in his arms. She didn't explain nor refute him. What's wrong with you? Zen asked in confusion. He could not see the expression on Dorothy's face, but he could feel that her soul of light currently gave out a somewhat loose aura. Logically speaking, there was nothing that could affect souls in the energy channel. Therefore, just passing through it would not cause her soul of light any harm. Now, Zen had planned to return her cloud-flying wheel to her and let her continue to follow him. Yet, Dorothy just curled up in his arms and didn't say a word. Thus, he just had to hold her in one arm and grab the two cloud-flying wheels together in the other, and flew forward. Dorothy, what happened? Was your soul of light hurt? I have soul pills, and soul crystal. Soon after they had left stage 13 of the other shore, they arrived at the Desire World. Generally speaking, the pressure on souls was certainly stronger in the Desire World than it was in the Lust World. Naturally, Zen also faintly felt such pressure, but since Dorothy had entered stage 13 of the other shore together with him, he believed that she could withstand the pressure as well. Meanwhile, Dorothy just looked at Zen's blurry face. What a fool, she thought. She did hear him ask a series of questions, but she didn't answer any of them. When Zen finally didn't know what to say next, he moved forward in silence. After a while, Dorothy suddenly said in a low voice, if only this space channel has no end. You must be joking, Dorothy, Zen said with a smile. Even if the space channel does have no end, the energy in the cloud-flying wheels will be used up sooner or later. By then, we will be transformed into. Suddenly, he stopped talking. Even though Zen lacked a sense of romance, he soon realized that he and Dorothy didn't seem to be talking about the same thing. Once Zen stopped speaking, Dorothy quickly tightened her arms that were around his neck and lowered her head onto his chest. Her lips stretched into a shy smile. Clearly, her character was totally different from Elvinia's. Everyone in the Oneness Sky Palace knew that Dorothy was warm and outgoing, but when actually faced with a man she liked, she was very shy and could not express her love explicitly. On the contrary, Elvinia looked haughty and cold. She seemed to keep away from everyone else, but she was straightforward and honest when she fell in love with someone. At that point, Zen's body was a little stiff. He had spent most of his time with Dorothy since he had entered the other shore, and the two of them had also experienced several life and death crises together. Still, he never expected that this little girl from the Origin Mountain would have a crush on him. His heart felt warm at the thought of Dorothy using the heart of accomplice without the least hesitation in the chaotic source world. But as soon as he began to speak, Dorothy stretched out her hand to cover his mouth. At the same time, she said, I don't care about any, but. She never had a relationship with any man yet, and just like Elvinia had said, she wasn't brave enough to confess her feelings. When Elvinia goaded her, however, she began to worry about losing Zen, and then couldn't hold back her affections any longer. Although she was a beloved one in the Origin Mountain, she was very young, and her mentality was not very different from that of any other young girl. As for Zen, he didn't know how to respond to her words. Just then, dozens of energy bands rolled up like mad in the channel ahead of them. Energy flowed wildly and vented towards the channel in a deranged fashion. It turned out that they had reached the most dangerous part of the vortex. Hold me tight. Of course, Zen couldn't afford to be distracted. As the two cloud-flying wheels turned slightly, he shuttled in multiple directions among the energy bands, like a swallow that flew in a thunderstorm. Fortunately, it was not a long journey. After no more than half a minute, they had successfully passed through, and there was no more dangerous part ahead. They flew in the peaceful vortex for about 5 minutes, then they finally saw the exit in front of them. When Zen was about to get close to it, he suddenly felt a strong force thrust upon him. Unlike what had happened when he had entered the energy vortex, this thrust directly pushed him and Dorothy out. Meanwhile, a purple light curtain flashed everywhere in the sky outside. The purple light curtain caused a trace of dreamy colors to wash over stage 14 of the other shore. Chapter 3093, The Change in the Vortex. The 33 stages on the other shore were distributed such that there were 13 stages in the Lust World and 19 stages in the Desire World. The Desire World gathered together the backbone power of the entire Source World. Most people who could enter this world were at the Chaotic Source Realm. But they could enter stage 14 even if they hadn't reached the Chaotic Source Realm. Only precursor was that their souls of light had turned into indigo souls. But from stage 14 onward, the other shore power of the other shore tokens measured at least 1,000 divine megatons. Creatures that hadn't merged with the chaotic source spirits wouldn't be able to unleash their full power. One solution to this problem would be to fuse with another shore token of the descending type. But there was a huge gap between the physical strength of the chaotic source realm warriors and that of those who were not at the chaotic source realm. Beneath the energy vortex was a stone platform similar to the one located at stage 13 in the Lust World. A few souls of light waited on this platform. These souls of light belonged to the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace. Most of them were from the group that had ascended before Zen. But there were several souls of light that were imposing and serious. These belonged to the senior disciples of the Land of Sword Grief. As Zen circled in the air alongside Dorothy, he felt an invisible pressure bearing down on them from the curtain of purple light floating in the sky. But because Zen's and Dorothy's souls of light had long since become indigo souls, they could bear the pressure. He held Dorothy in his arms as he descended slowly. He stepped carefully onto the stone platform before gently putting her down. Dorothy blushed scarlet under the gaze of the crowd and retreated quickly to the side. Lucky for her, everyone was on the other shore and couldn't see her flaming face. But the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace had seen what had happened and were stunned. Passing through the energy vortex was dangerous. What was this couple doing? A soul of light with a strong aura walked towards them and said, "Please tell us your names and show us your soul marks." These senior disciples didn't know what was going on in the lust world and were using the soul marks to verify their identities. "Dorothy, from the Origin Mountain," Dorothy said, keeping her voice low as she showed him her soul mark. "Zen, from the Flow Sword Sect," Zen said. The senior disciples of the Land of Sword Grief looked at him in unison when they heard his name. Many of them looked amused. Before Dorothy had entered the Land of Sword Grief, they had already heard about her. After all, she was the apple of Yasmin's eye, and she and Elvinia were considered to be the top 2 women warriors of the Oneness Sky Palace. Zen had become famous because of the battle he had fought after he had entered the Land of Sword Grief. His ranking on the ranking stone had surpassed that of the senior disciples of the Land of Sword Grief. Gee, Madame Yasmin's granddaughter and Zen. They make a perfect match. This boy was not born in a great clan, but he has incredible talent and will make many, many achievements in the future. Archibald will be shocked to see this. I'll tell him after I get out of the other shore. I wonder how he will react outwardly, though. They communicated with each other through their life vitality. There were only a few female members in the Land of Sword Grief. Dorothy's and Elvinia's beauty attracted the attention of many senior disciples after they entered the Land of Sword Grief. Some admired them secretly, and some tried to ingratiate themselves with them. Elvinia looked aloof, causing these warriors to feel so intimidated that they didn't dare try to get close to her. Dorothy dealt with them cleverly. She received more attention than Elvinia. Many people became jealous as they watched Zen hold Dorothy on the other shore. After Zen and Dorothy verified their identities by showing their soul marks and speaking their names, they silently stepped aside. Moments later, Zen said, "I'll leave the other shore now. You stay here and wait for me to come back." His physical body was still in the lust world. It was now his physical body's turn to come here. "Okay, be careful," Dorothy whispered shyly. Buzz. Soon, Zen's soul of light had disappeared from the stone platform. The others were waiting. When they found that Zen had dissipated his soul of light, they were confused, but didn't think much of it. The next moment, Zen's physical body had reappeared on the stone platform of stage 13. Hyam was pleased to see Zen return. It looked like Zen's and Dorothy's souls of light had safely reached their destination. But Zen didn't tell Hyam anything about his other name, Thad. Hyam wouldn't reveal his secret or ask Zen about that. Elvinia asked Zen worriedly, "Do you think my physical body will pass through that?" "You can't stay in stage 13 just for this physical body," Zen tried to comfort her. "Don't worry. The worst that could happen is that you'll have to abandon the purified being's body. Your soul of light will always be powerful." "Okay, Zen, you have to protect me," Elvinia said, a lovely but rare smile on her lips. Elvinia was not an easygoing person. Zen had actually liked the version of Elvinia who had lost her memory. But now, she was behaving like she used to be when she had lost her memory in the dark region. At her expression, Zen's heart skipped a beat. But he was still confused. Both Dorothy and Elvinia were behaving unusually today. After many disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace, including Sally, had ascended to the next stage, only Zen, Hyam, and Elvinia were left on the stone platform. "I'll go first, guys," Hyam said. He then pulled out the cloud flying wheel and flew towards the energy vortex in the distance. After Hyam had disappeared in the vortex, Zen said, "It's our turn. I'll lead the way since I have just passed through this vortex. You can follow me." He then activated the cloud flying wheel once again and shot off into the distance, Elvinia following close behind. Whoosh, whoosh, the two of them rose high into the air and flew towards the energy vortex. The energy bands didn't react when Zen first approached the energy vortex. But when Elvinia approached it, the bands seemed to instantly become frenzied and restless. Elvenia frowned as she manipulated the cloud-flying wheel to pause in midair. The energy bands were restless, but they didn't roll upwards. Zen observed them for a few seconds before saying, "It's all right. Let's speed up." Elvenia pursed her lips at this. She told herself that she should believe Zen, and she let the doubt go. They waited for a while outside and then suddenly sped up, rushing into the energy vortex. But the moment they entered it, a weird change took place in the energy vortex. The energy bands in the outer layer rolled back in unison, tightly sealing their way to retreat. Chapter 3094, Form a Path. It was clear that Elvenia was causing the turmoil of the energy vortex. The entrance was filled with energy, it was impossible to head back. Inside the channel, the energy became manic. The colorful energy bands rose rapidly, filling every corner of the channel. Neither Zen nor Elvenia said a single word to each other before flying forward. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The channel within the energy vortex only grew more and more manic as Elvenia continued further. The tumultuous energy bands flew around, forming a dense net with Elvenia and Zen as its targets. By now, Elvenia felt the panic set in. What should we do? Can we get out of the other shore? While the cloud-flying wheels could help them fly in the air, their pushing force was lackluster. Even with a corporeal body that was more flexible than a soul of light, neither of them could gain any momentum or speed. And because corporeal bodies were far heavier than souls of light, they looked rather clumsy as they navigated in the air. So how could they break through the net formed by the energy bands? The net before them was moving closer as the channel behind them continued narrowing. At this rate, a maximum of 20 seconds was enough for the vortex to completely eat them up. How could they escape merging with the vortex? Don't be afraid, Zen suddenly said. He held up the cloud-flying wheel in the opposite direction to retreat to Elvenia's side and grabbed her arm. The act only stunned her. She had no clue what Zen was planning to do to break the siege under the circumstances. Just then, she witnessed a flash of lightning on Zen's back. Following the sound of a thunderbolt, a pair of great thunder wings suddenly grew from his back. Thunder materialization. Although he couldn't use the shade stone liquid on the other shore, the godly way's internal momentum was still available. He could still draw some internal momentum out of his inner world. Back in the dark region, he managed to use the life godly way to treat the three-eyed boy, after all. In the divine land, Zen quite often used the pair of thunder wings. But because the internal momentum was far weaker than the other shore power in the source world, Zen rarely pulled them out. But in the most critical moments, the internal momentum could still save him. Crack! A bright light flashed upon both his wings as he dragged Elvenia through the net like a bolt of lightning. Seeing that she was fine, Elvenia went blank before soon understanding what had happened. Although both of them were corporeal bodies, they differed in nature. Elvenia obtained a powerful purified being's body when she entered the other shore with her soul of light, and Zen entered the other shore with his own corporeal body. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. As soon as they passed through the energy net, the energy bands before them began intertwining into another net. Then, Zen held Elvenia horizontally. His thunder wings crackled before once again shooting forward like lightning. Crack, clap, they broke through a net every time he bolted. While the entire channel grew manic and the energy bands swept around, Zen's speed had increased rapidly. He seemed to be passing through the nets before they could even form. Elvenia lay in Zen's arms peacefully, staring up at him with bright eyes. Once Teague's soul was driven away, Elvenia recovered all the memories about the dark region. But she was quite an ignorant child in her memories, she couldn't escape the embarrassment as she browsed through the memories. From these memories, she found a unique sense of peace and trust. It should have been the same as what Lavender, Nellie and Laquisha had felt. Zen seemed to have a knack for finding unexpected ways to slip out of desperate circumstances. This was, perhaps, why Elvenia felt so assured. At Zen's speed, he managed to cover a great distance in mere seconds. In around 20 seconds, they could rush out of the channel. Although the plan was going smoothly, Zen couldn't help but feel a little worried. Last time, when Zen passed the second half of the channel with Dorothy, there was a section full of restless energy. But in the first half of the channel, Elvenia had caused a huge turmoil in the energy vortex, which meant the second half would possibly be even more troublesome. Just as he was thinking, Elvenia suddenly called out, "Zen, look." His lips curled into a bitter smile when he clearly saw what was ahead of them. Before he figured out how to cross it, the road ahead had been completely blocked by the energy bands. With the channel behind them still narrowing, and the front exit getting sealed off by the energy bands, there was no way out at all. "It looks like all I can do now is abandon this body," Elvenia said reluctantly. It was everyone's dream to obtain such a powerful body on the other shore. But they had no other way to go. If she didn't give up the body, she and Zen would die there. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The energy bands piled up until they were sandwiched in. Crack. Zen tried changing a few positions, but the space for him to dodge was lessening. Zen, don't hold on, Elvinia said firmly. Ready to leave her body, she shut her eyes. Wait, Zen called out as the lightning in his hand flashed, shifting into a spiral-shaped thunder halberd. Aiming at the channel's inner wall, he shot it. Just as he expected, these energy bands were of very high grade. Once the thunder and lightning the thunderstorm godly wave generated entered the area, they were constantly melted down by the energy bands, making it impossible to break through them. The wall of energy bands formed a vortex. Several energy bands shot right at Zen. He dodged them quite easily, but a thoughtful look appeared on his face. Seeing the energy bands coming at her from both sides, Elvinia grew even more anxious. Zen, what are you waiting for? If it goes on like this. In the middle of her thought, a lightning bolt flashed from Zen's fingertip, aiming at a spot on the wall. Crack, crack, every time he attacked the wall, several energy bands would roll out. Instead of returning to their original spots, they mixed in with other bands. One by one, the bands rolled out from the wall until they left a great hole. The sight had Elvinia too dumbfounded for words. Never did she expect Zen to form a path by taking advantage of the energy band's natural properties. There isn't only one way out. Zen was perfectly calm. More thunder and lightning bolts were released from his body, shooting through the hole. Skillfully dodging the bands, he brought Elvinia to the hole. The moment they entered the hole, the energy bands gathered in from the front and back, filling the entire channel. Chapter 3095, Iron Plate. The changes within the energy channel also manifested externally. Hyam was the last to leave the vortex and enter stage 14, just before Zen and Elvinia. Upon exiting, he found that the previously stable energy vortex began to fluctuate with the energy bands constantly rolling around abnormally and blocking the exit. Hyam couldn't help but gasp in astonishment. This is. After Elvinia became a purified being, Hyam learned a few bits of important information. From what he was able to gather, a purified being was the ruler of a stage, thus, in theory, they shouldn't be able to leave that certain stage. If that was the case, then wouldn't that mean Elvinia had to stay behind and would be unable to reach the Desire World? She was bound to encounter some problems at least. Looking at the energy channel, Hyam realized that the problem had just materialized itself. If the energy vortex was sealed, then that meant Zen and Elvinia wouldn't be able to pass through it at all. What happened? The passageway. It's closed. Everyone from the Oneness Sky Palace got through, right? I think so. That was really close. It's a good thing we were able to get through before it did that. None of the disciples from the Oneness Sky Palace thought that the purified being had anything to do with it. To them, the vortex was simply strangely malfunctioning. Wait, I think someone is missing. Someone remarked. You're right, where's Princess Elvinia? Was she unable to pass through? She is different from us anyway. Is it because she has a corporeal body on the other shore? The disciples began to whisper amongst themselves at this current development. Dorothy's heart was erratic as she analyzed the situation. Elvinia, Zen, in an instant, she immediately dissipated her soul of light. The next time she opened her eyes, she was back in her cultivation room, worried sick about what was currently brewing. She didn't really care about Elvinia's safety, but Zen, he was an entirely different matter. Crack. Dorothy opened the door and headed straight to the number 1 cultivation room in the far right where Zen was in. Several senior disciples of the Land of Sword Grief rushed over when they saw her in such a hurry. All of them sported flattering smiles on their faces. Princess Dorothy, what made you so anxious all of a sudden? Dorothy could only look at Zen's room in worry. Can that door be opened? She asked. Her deepest fear would be if she opened that door and found only Zen's mangled corpse waiting for her. The senior disciples who greeted her could only look at each other. It's a private place. It's not really advisable to disturb the cultivator inside. If the warrior inside is unwilling to open it, then the people outside should. However, Dorothy was in no mood to listen to their nonsense. Can the door be opened? She repeated with urgency. Can it be broken or something? Her suggestion was immediately met with obvious hesitation. Break it. Well, it could work, but there was nobody that dared provoke Zen, not when he gained a bit of a reputation ever since coming to the Land of Sword Grief. Opening his cultivation room wasn't a wise thing. I'll bear the consequences, whatever they may be, Dorothy declared confidently. The man smiled. All right then. Since Dorothy already expressed her willingness to take accountability, he would willingly break the door down for her. Reaching out his hand, the man gathered the other shore power in his palm. With the force of over 1,000 divine megatons, he pushed at the door and broke through. Whoosh! Dorothy wasted no time and rushed inside. Stay outside, she ordered the senior disciples clustered behind her. All of them were curious but could guess why Dorothy had been so anxious and demanding. Do you think Zen died on the other shore? It's possible. They are supposed to leave the lust world and enter the desire world today. Died? How is that possible? He's so powerful. I can't imagine him not reaching the desire world, given his skills. Although the energy vortex could be dangerous, most warriors got through it with no problems. Inside the cultivation room, Dorothy found Zen sitting cross-legged on the floor, with faint golden light glowing on the surface of his body. She gently pressed on the spot between his brows and breathed a sigh of relief when she sensed the fluctuation of his soul aura. Within the vortex, Zen and Elvinia were moving in a very strange way. He had gradually figured out the rules of the energy bands. These energy bands composed the entirety of the vortex. However, Zen found that they could be divided into 2 layers. On the outer layer, the energy bands were in a dissociative state and were easily disturbed, sweeping up and attacking those that passed by. The energy bands in the inner layer were more stable and formed the walls within the passage. When Elvinia had approached the outer energy bands, it led to her getting attacked crazily. This was the consequence of breaking the rules of being a purified being. The inner energy bands, since they were more stable, did not harm Elvinia in any way. It was only when Zen hit them with the internal momentum of the godly way did they launch a counterattack. Zen felt a bit more relaxed after learning all this. He specially launched attacks towards the energy bands in a certain direction and waited for their reaction. Once they rolled up, the big hole continued to move forward. A strange feeling came over Elvinia as she watched the energy bands that were tens of feet away around her. In such a dangerous circumstance, it was hard to believe that the 2 of them not only survived, but were able to move forward bit by bit. She couldn't help but sigh in relief. Can we dig into the desire world by continuously doing this? She whispered to Zen. While focusing on releasing lightning, Zen said, the direction should be right but it's hard to say. Duck. Zen warned just as an energy band flew right past his right arm. Fortunately, Elvinia heard his warning just in time and lowered her head. Whoosh! A wound appeared on Zen's right arm. At the same time, all the light dots formed by the chaotic source spirits in his body were extinguished, falling into a state of fatigue. He couldn't bring the shade stone liquid with him to the other shore, but the chaotic source spirits were different. Since Zen's body had entered the other shore, the chaotic source spirits, which were from there in the first place, could naturally work. The energy is so powerful, he muttered in shock. He initially thought he could count on the chaotic source spirits to resist an energy band. But it seemed they couldn't even bear the force when an energy band merely brushed past him. Zen found himself becoming more cautious as they moved forward. He tried to lure only one energy band into attacking them at a time, which slowed down their speed significantly. He pulled out the energy bands one by one as if painstakingly reeling threads from a silk cocoon. 2 hours later, Zen pulled out an energy band and found an iron plate in front of them. Chapter 3096, The Iron House. Both of them were baffled by the sight of this iron plate. What is this? Elvinia asked, blinking. Zen squinted at it. Let's take a closer look. The thunder wings on his back flapped as the 2 of them approached the iron plate. Zen reached out to touch it, his fingers grazing the cold surface. Elvinia touched it curiously. What is this made of? It isn't eroded by all this energy at all. After a moment's thought, Zen drew out a great amount of force from his inner world and directed it at the plate. Bang! The impact caused a loud sound, but the solid iron plate did not move at all. Zen frowned slightly. Whatever material this plate was made of, it seemed impossible for them to move it. They needed to get through this energy vortex, but this plate was proving to be an obstacle. Let's try going above it. Zen raised his head, fixing his gaze upwards. Crack! Another lightning bolt flashed toward the space above them. Zen pulled down another energy band. The 2 of them moved upwards little by little along the iron plate. After more than 200 feet up, they had yet to see where it ended. This plate apparently went much higher than Zen had imagined. Elvinia blinked. Let's move to the left. Zen nodded in agreement. They continued moving, but now to the left side. This time, they reached the end after a short distance of less than 30 feet. The iron plate bent at a sharp right angle in this area. When Zen saw this, his eyes lit up. It's not an iron plate. This looks like a house. There was a confused look in Elvinia's eyes. They obviously had the same thought in mind. Who would have thought that there would be an iron house in this energy vortex? Driven by curiosity, Zen moved forward, following the newly discovered side. The wall was still made of the same iron material along the way, but after more than 100 feet, he finally saw a small door. The door was only 2 feet wide, about the same size as a foxhole. There were extremely complicated Sanskrit words engraved on it. It was almost impossible to open the door by brute force. The iron material was quite strong. As Zen gently pressed on the Sanskrit words, one of the words lit up. Intrigued, Elvinia followed suit. Every time she pressed, one word would light up. After a few more presses, all of the Sanskrit words had been lit up. However, the illumination soon faded away. It seems the words should be pressed in a certain order to open the door, Elvinia mused out loud. Unfortunately, it would be difficult to guess what that order could be. If we know the meaning of the Sanskrit words, we may be able to solve it, Zen said. Elvinia raised a brow. She did remember that Zen seemed to have some expertise in deciphering Sanskrit words, since he was able to interpret the truth enlightenment correctly before. However, what Elvinia did not know was that it was not Zen who deciphered the Sanskrit words, but Jeffrey in his inner world. All this time, the regal jade spirit had been hiding in Zen's inner world, completely clueless of what was happening outside, which was why when Zen summoned the spirit, he was shocked to see where they were. Zen, where are you now? I am on the way to stage 14, Zen said. At these words, the regal jade spirit fell silent for a moment. The entire regal jade civilization had withdrawn from the desire world. He definitely knew about this vortex. What is it with this iron house? How can it not erode in the energy vortex? The regal jade spirit asked, staring agog at the iron gate. I don't know, but I want to take a look inside. Please ask Jeffrey to decipher the Sanskrit words, Zen replied. The regal jade spirit's curiosity was also piqued now, so he was only too glad to cooperate. Zen waited for about 5 minutes before the regal jade spirit relayed Jeffrey's response. Your son said that you have to press the 3rd word on the left, then the 6th on the right, and then the last one. As the spirit spoke, Zen pressed the Sanskrit words on the door one by one. When he pressed a word, it lit up, giving off a bright light. After Zen pressed 12 of the words as directed, a circle of Sanskrit words began to emit green light. Buzz. As the green light flashed on the door, a loud click also sounded. The door had opened. It worked. A grin spread on Elvinia's face. Go on, get in, the regal jade spirit urged. Zen opened the small door, supported Elvinia's body, and pushed her inside slowly. Then he went in after her. The door was not big. It was obviously not designed for a human being. After squeezing his way through the door, Zen raised his head and looked around. The interior wasn't small. Both he and Elvinia were able to stand upright once inside. The two looked around the house, eyes narrowed. The space inside was divided into 2 parts, one light and one dark. The area near the door was illuminated and was empty, while the other area was pitch black. No one could see what was in the darkness. Is that half of the space already in the dark region? Zen said, staring at the darkness ahead. I think so, Elvinia said, nodding. As a purified being, she was very sensitive to the dark region. As they got closer to the darkness, a shrill scream rang out. The voice sounded extremely forlorn. When it reached their ears, it felt like countless needles had been stuck in their souls. Struggling through the pain, anger crossing her features, Elvinia raised her right hand and snapped, great Sanskrit light. Swish, a white light so bright one couldn't stare at it directly shot toward the dark. As it did, Zen clearly saw a row of iron cages hanging along the walls in the dark. The cages contained strange types of monsters. The iron cage right in front of them contained a monster with a head like an owl's and a body like a leopard's, covered with dozens of thorny tentacles. As it screamed, it was enveloped in the great Sanskrit light. Under the glare of the snow-white light, its body quickly began to melt. First its fur, then its flesh, its blood, and finally its bones. Elvinia showed no mercy and didn't stop the great Sanskrit light until the monster was completely melted. Her chest heaved up and down. It took her a while to calm down. Obviously, she had been frightened. What is this iron house? Zen looked at the darkness and frowned slightly. No matter what this is, we should probably kill all the monsters in the cages, Elvinia said coldly. She raised a finger. The bright light gathered around her hand once again. Chapter 3097, Guard. Elvinia didn't want to see these abominable monsters at all. There were more than one iron cage on the wall. As the ball of light on her fingertips exploded, another blazing white light shot forward and illuminated another iron cage. A snake-like creature was locked in the second cage. It had a terrifyingly strange face on its head. When the light shone on the cage, the snake screamed and ran around frantically in the cage. It made strange noises that sounded like sizzling screams. Then at last, it was completely annihilated under the inescapable blinding light. Seeing how the two creatures ended, the monsters in the other cages suddenly jumped up and down in the cages. They had been locked here in the cages for quite a long time. But even if that was the case, it was better to be a living dog than a dead lion. In the end, they didn't want to be completely destroyed by the light. For a moment, all kinds of weird and horrifying shrieks could be heard from the iron cages. Elvinia didn't show any signs of mercy at all. With a flash of light in her hand, she was about to eliminate the monsters in the iron cages one by one. At this time, Zen quickly reached out his hand and stopped her. "Listen to me, don't kill them now," Zen said. "But they..." Elvinia frowned in confusion. "Only the first monster had attacked us. These other monsters are not attacking us, and they are locked in cages," Zen said seriously. "These monsters weren't hostile to them at all. Moreover, if they wanted to really know more about this iron house, then they would probably need to start with these monsters." Under Zen's persuasion, Elvinia decided to stop what she was about to do. With her personality, she would never show mercy or listen to others. However, Zen's words really persuaded her. She then showed a sweet and understanding smile and asked, "Then what should we do next?" "Let's go inside first and have a look," Zen said. She didn't know if these monsters were intelligent or not, but she thought it would be best if they could somehow communicate with her. She released 2 rays of light to cover the both of them, then they stepped into the darkness. Because of the dark region's characteristics, even if he was very near something, he still could not see it. So, Zen couldn't see the situation of the cage that he was approaching. After thinking about their situation for a while, Zen suddenly said, "Take out the darkness fruits." Zen's physical body was unable to carry the Sumeru space. So the last time he left the dark region, he had asked Elvinia to keep the candles and the darkness fruits. Elvinia took out 2 darkness fruits and each of them swallowed one. Then, the darkness in front of them slowly faded away. Although their surroundings were still filled with darkness, Zen was able to clearly see in the dark without the help of Elvinia's light. The iron cage in front of Zen had a palm-sized lizard locked inside. It curled up at the farthest side of the cage, trembling with fear. Zen tried to communicate with the lizard, but the little creature was obviously clueless. It didn't respond to Zen at all. He gave up on the lizard and walked to the next cage. The monster in the next cage was even stranger. It just looked like a plain purple cube. Its body seemed sticky and it stayed motionless at the center of the cage. When Zen approached, the cube suddenly trembled. Then, 2 big round eyes popped at the center of the cube and stared at him curiously. When he saw this, Zen asked, "Can you speak at all?" Zen did not expect this cube to speak like humans, but he hoped that it could give at least a meaningful response. But at the next moment, the reaction made by the cube exceeded Zen's expectations. The sticky cube suddenly dissolved and gradually turned into a pool of mucus. The pool of mucus was constantly rising and it seemed like it was forming itself into a figure. Finally, it turned into a human shape, complete with a nose, 2 eyes, a mouth, and a body. Soon, a person who looked exactly like Zen appeared in the cage. "What? This thing, it can turn into human shape." Elvinia stared at the Zen in the cage with a strange and curious look. Cough, kof, kof. Suddenly, the thing in the cage coughed a few times and took a few short breaths. After adapting to its new form, it finally opened its mouth and said, I can turn into any creature." When he heard this, Zen raised his eyebrows suddenly and asked, "You know human language?" Of course. After the thing adapted to its new body, it spoke more fluently and naturally. It sounded like it was nothing different from an ordinary human being. This is the talent of shape-shifting spirits. We can imitate the language of countless races, including the human race. Well, I think it's a great thing that we can communicate. Do tell us, what is this place? Elvinia asked, as she stared into the iron cage. Her fingertips began to flash white light again. Her face looked intimidating. The Zen in the cage seemed to be instinctively afraid of the great Sanskrit light. It subconsciously took a step back away from the light. With a terrified look, it said, "I'm just a pet. Please don't kill me." Zen stopped Elvinia again, shaking his head. Then he said, "We came here by accident. Could you tell us where we are?" The Zen, in the cage breathed a sigh of relief and replied, "You'd better leave now. This is the bleak center, and my master might come back at any moment. Although I don't know how you got here in the first place, I am sure that you will die if my master finds out." Bleak center. Zen's eyes narrowed slightly when he learned this new information. "How long has it been since your master left?" "It's been more than 10,000 years, said the Zen, in the cage seriously. Over 10,000 years was only a short period of time for the other shore creatures that were easily able to live through several chaotic eras. However, the master of this place hadn't returned for 10,000 years. How could he possibly return now, at this exact moment? When he heard this, Zen quickly relaxed. He continued to ask, "What kind of place is this bleak center? What is it used for? And who is your master?" The Zen, in the cage looked a little hesitant. It seemed to be very cowardly, especially after it saw the dark region creatures in the previous cages die under the blinding light. It was frightened by the two humans in front of it, especially by Elvinia who stood next to Zen. "Tell us at once," Elvinia commanded fiercely and directly. The other, Zen, glanced at the light that was shining in Elvinia's hand and said, "The bleak center is the place to build the passageway to the desire world. My master is only a guard and he has been guarding here for many years. But in the last tens of thousands of years, he often went out and left us. This is all I know." The monsters in the cages were nothing more than pets that gave the master company and pleasure while he was guarding this place. Naturally, they didn't know too much. However, Zen still got a piece of important information from its words. The passage to the desire world was not formed naturally, but it was built by this iron house. In theory, it was the instant civilization that had created the other shore. Every stage and every passageway, including the energy vortex and the star doors, should be created by the instant civilization. Zen wondered if the master of the Iron House was one of the members of the instant civilization. Chapter 3098, Clues. As Zen thought things over, Elvinia directly asked the shape-shifting spirit, "Don't you have the ability of shape-shifting? Why don't you transform into your master so we can have a look what your master looks like?" "Yes, that sounds like a good idea." Zen patted his head. The monster before them called itself shape-shifting spirit, so turning into the form of its master should be no problem for it. The Zen, in the cage hesitated. It seemed to be terrified of its master. "Well, come on, change," Elvinia ordered, the impatience clear in her voice. Although the Iron House slightly piqued her interest, Elvinia didn't want to waste her time exploring it like what Zen and the regal jade spirit wanted to do. In fact, Zen was the only reason she had enough patience to stay. Buzz. The ball of light Elvinia held in her palm began to twitch. What appeared as a harmless light source to Zen and Elvinia ended up being extremely dangerous to the shape-shifting spirit. Alright, I'll do it." The shape-shifting spirit finally compromised. Right then and there, its body, which was in Zen's form, began to soften and become pliable and sticky to the touch like clay before changing into a round sphere. It was translucent, and there were gently flickering flames burning within it. It possessed no eyes, ears, mouth, or nose. "This is what your master is like?" Zen asked curiously. "Yes, this is what he looks like," the shape-shifting spirit replied. Zen and Elvinia had a hard time confirming this since they had never seen its master before. But then, the regal jade spirit that had been watching them secretly finally said in a serious tone, "This is a member of the Element Spirit Civilization." Quote, Element Spirit Civilization? Zen was stunned. He had heard about this particular civilization before through the regal jade spirit. The instant civilization was the first civilization to ever exist. It was also the civilization that had initiated all the civilizations in the entire chaos. For a long time, everyone doubted its existence because there was little to no proof of it. Therefore, everyone acknowledged the second civilization, the Element Spirit Civilization, as the first one instead. What was more, the last flaw of the way's blending energy should also be in their hands. The Element Spirit Civilization has 5 big branches, which are metal spirits, wood spirits, water spirits, fire spirits and earth spirits, the regal jade spirit enlightened. What the shape-shifting spirit is showing us is a fire spirit, hence the flames encased within it, the regal jade spirit continued. Even during the peak of the regal jade civilization, they were no match against the powerful Element Spirit Civilization. In fact, the latter had already become a dominant power on the other shore at that time. And as the second civilization, they were presented with numerous advantages. The first civilization that was naturally formed in the chaos. The first civilization to enter the other shore. The first civilization that produced a chaos ancient god. With their abundance of first titles, they were able to cover some truths in the long time of their development. There was no mistaking the great power they held. The energy vortex has served as a bridge between the desire world and the lust world. For countless years, numerous beings from various civilizations traveled through it with extreme caution. But I never thought that the element spirit civilization was always guarding it. The regal jade spirit heaved a sigh. With them guarding, they could let anyone pass. As for how to enter the Iron House, the civilizations following it were clueless as to how it was done. If it wasn't for Elvenia, the purified being that triggered the counterattack on the entire energy vortex, Zen would have never found the Iron House. Even if someone found it, it'd be impossible for them to enter since the Sanskrit words etched in the door were difficult to decipher. Luckily, Zen had Jeffrey in his inner world who was able to easily decipher Sanskrit words. By some strange circumstances, Zen was able to break in. Zen's questions were finally answered by the regal jade spirit. He blinked his eyes before proceeding to ask the shape-shifting spirit, since your master is the guard of this Iron House, he can control the energy vortex as well, correct? It was clear that the shape-shifting spirit didn't dare to reveal too much. Elvenia began to threateningly toss the ball of light in her palm up and down. Her control of the great Sanskrit light was growing better every day. Splash! The shape-shifting spirit quickly changed back to its original form. Then, it began to say, indeed, my master can control the energy vortex. Every once in a while, he closes the passageway. Once, it was closed for a very long time. It's true, the regal jade spirit informed Zen in his mind. The energy vortex has been closed for many times, but every time it was closed, it was soon opened. It is said that it was closed for a long time, during the 750th chaotic era. Then suddenly, it opened once more and no one knew what had happened. Where does your master control the passageway? Zen asked. Within the Iron House, except for the cages hanging on the wall, it was almost empty. Above there, replied the shape-shifting spirit. Zen looked to the corner of the wall that it pointed at, which was covered with a dozen Sanskrit words. My master could go up once he activates the Sanskrit words. I've never been there, you probably won't be able to go up either. Although the shape-shifting spirit was proficient in the languages spoken by many races and could change into various forms, it was incapable of understanding Sanskrit words. Really? Zen's lips curled up as he walked towards the corner of the wall and stood in front of the Sanskrit words. What is that human doing? Asked the shape-shifting spirit. Trying to decipher the Sanskrit words, probably, Elvenia informed it with a shrug of her shoulders. That's impossible, Sanskrit words are never easy to decipher. The shape-shifting spirit exclaimed, doubting Zen's success. Nothing is impossible, don't forget how we came in, Elvenia reminded it coldly. The shape-shifting spirit had been confined in this Iron House for countless years, and it had forgotten that there were still those Sanskrit words set outside the Iron House. The door wouldn't have been opened if those Sanskrit words were not deciphered. So you're saying he really can decipher the words? As the shape-shifting spirit stood still in disbelief, Zen reached out towards the Sanskrit words and began to press them. Buzz 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 buzz. As Zen pressed a finger to each word, it began to glow. Soon, after he pressed 10 times, a green light glowed on each word in the dark and the sound of metal grinding against each other could be heard. A metal staircase slowly began to descend from above. You did it. The shape-shifting spirit was left speechless. Ever since it was trapped here, no one had successfully managed to break into the Iron House. Now here it was witnessing an individual with great ability doing exactly what its master could do. Where did he learn to decipher Sanskrit words so effortlessly? It had never seen such a thing happen before. As the staircase drew closer to Zen, Elvenia drew near him as well. Zen furrowed his brows as soon as he stepped on the stairs. He turned his head and stared at the shape-shifting spirit. Zen, what's wrong? Elvenia asked. She worried that the shape-shifting spirit might have told a lie and would eventually lead them right into a trap. Zen quickly walked to the iron cage and asked, You have seen humans before? The shape-shifting spirit was different from other creatures on the other shore. It could morph into various creatures. Zen was sure it was only the first time that it had morphed into him, yet it mimicked him perfectly, with the exact appearance, movement, and language. It meant this was by no means the first time that the shape-shifting spirit had become a human. Chapter 3099, Control the Energy Vortex. Since the shape-shifting spirit felt that there was no room for it to bargain, it just told everything it knew. Generally speaking, the element spirit race especially liked to take the shape-shifting spirits as their pets. It was mainly because the element spirit race did not have a stable form. In fact, as one of the powerful civilizations, it was easy for the element spirit race to shape themselves into any form they wanted. When a civilization was born and developed, however, their own consciousness could not change. Therefore, they stubbornly maintained their original state while they admired the wonderful forms of civilizations after them. Overall, the entire race had the hobby of collecting pets and imprisoning slaves. As it happened, the extremely powerful elites of the element spirit race were qualified to detain beings from any race as slaves and pets. On the contrary, not all the members of the element spirit race on the other shore were considered as powerful, and some weak ones couldn't collect enough slaves to entertain themselves. So, the easiest method available to them was to raise shape-shifting spirits. After the shape-shifting spirits were trained, they could be transformed into almost anything that the element spirit race needed. Before I was sold to my master, I was locked up in a temple in stage 25 of the other shore like other shape-shifting spirits. There were many beings from civilized races held inside the temple, including 2 humans, a man and a woman, the shape-shifting spirit said. Basically, the shape-shifting spirits were treated like a kind of commodity, as the element spirit race traded them. To become a qualified commodity, the shape-shifting spirits must first learn to change themselves into many forms before they could become useful to their future masters. Thus, the purpose of the many living creatures held in the temple was to serve as a guide for them to imitate. Stage 25 of the other shore? Zen asked curiously. It's the long night stage, Elvinia said. Zen nodded in response. The long night stage was still within the desire world, which meant that there were humans in the desire world. How long ago was the time when you were kept in the temple and met those human beings? He asked again. If it was during the current chaotic era, then the news would be of low value. Human beings had set foot on the other shore since the ancient times, in the form of physical body. At that time, the element spirit race could easily capture even members of the 9 Li race. It wasn't even a big deal for them to catch the humans from the Pear Hill, but those races didn't have much to do with the human race of the other shore. I don't remember. There should be at least 10 chaotic eras ago, answered the shape-shifting spirit. 10 chaotic eras. If that was the case, then the humans the shape-shifting spirit had met in the temple had nothing to do with the humans born in the present era. It was safe to say that they were definitely the humans from the other shore. What is the name of the temple? Zen asked once more. It's a temple of the element spirit race, built by the fire branch of the race. It's called the Dark Fire Temple, said the shape-shifting spirit. Zen kept the information in mind, then turned to climb the metal staircase. Elvinia silently followed him. When they reached the top of the iron house, their calm demeanor simultaneously changed into surprised looks. The upper floor of the iron house was a completely different world compared to the desolate lower floor. Not far away from the stairway entrance was a large tank. Although it was tightly shut, they clearly felt a surge of strong power from it despite the distance. The power felt really pure, without anything messy mixed in. Zen and Elvinia looked at each other and exclaimed, "The soul crystal." It wasn't long before Zen strode towards the tank and opened the lid. His eyes glittered at the sight. The pure soul crystal filled up the large tank. Oh, my goodness, there's so much of it. Even though Elvinia was good at hiding her emotions, she couldn't help crying out in excitement as well when she saw the huge amount of soul crystal. Of course, Zen was also thrilled. According to the shape-shifting spirit, those who kept shape-shifting spirits as pets had relatively low status in the whole element spirit race. Thus, how could a guardian of such a low position get so much soul crystal? While Elvinia was still in shock over the soul crystal, Zen had already calmed down and walked into the room. There was an iron table beside the large tank, and a row of Sanskrit words were engraved on both of its sides. Quite different from the previous dreary Sanskrit words, these Sanskrit words continuously emitted red light. In the middle of the 2 rows of Sanskrit words was a sunken place, inlaid with a strangely shaped metal token. Zen tried to pull out the metal token, but it didn't move at all when he used a bit of strength. He then continued to increase his strength, but it seemed that the metal token was merged with the metal table. He absolutely couldn't pull it out. After he thought for a while, he ended up turning to Jeffrey for help again. In only a short time, Jeffrey had figured it out and told Zen what to do through the regal jade spirit. It turned out that there were 2 ways to use the Sanskrit words. One was to take the metal token out, and the other was to turn it on. Taking it out is easy to understand, but what does it mean to turn it on? Nevertheless, he followed Jeffrey's instructions and pressed the Sanskrit words. When the 2 rows of the red Sanskrit words shone with a green light, he was able to take out the token from the iron table easily. Out of curiosity, he He inserted the metal token back into the iron table and pressed the Sanskrit words in another order. This time, instead of green light, a colorful beam of light came out of the Sanskrit words, and it was the same color as the energy vortex outside. Now, another interesting thing was happening at the same time as well. There was a colorful wave of light that began to glow in the middle of the room in the upper floor. Soon enough, a small energy vortex appeared in front of Zen and Elvenia. This energy vortex, Elvenia muttered. She couldn't help but be surprised once again. Don't be afraid, it's just a phantom, Zen assured her. This energy vortex had no energy at all, or at least Zen could not feel any from it. Although it was a phantom, the energy vortex in front of them should be in harmony with the large vortex outside. Now, both ends of the channel were closed, just like what Zen and Elvenia had encountered outside. The guard, turning it on, control it. The information from the shape-shifting spirit and Jeffrey filled Zen's mind and kept him thinking. A thought flashed in his brain, then he stretched his hand towards the vortex. The area he touched was soft as cotton. Just as he was about to pull it, the center of the small vortex twisted. Meanwhile, the center of the energy vortex outside began to twist from the middle. He thought more for a while, before he stretched his hands towards both ends of the small and long vortex, then curled it up. At the same time, the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace, who were still waiting on the stone platform of the Desire World, screamed. The energy vortex has changed again. The passageway is not only closed, it is also completely rolled up. What happened? Isn't it still changing its shape? The energy vortex has turned into the shape of a human, right? Is it some trick of the eye? The disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace could not understand what was happening. Even Dorothy also stared blankly at the energy vortex. She was confident that Zen was still alive, but she was still worried because Zen hadn't reached the Desire World by now. It meant that he was still trapped. Was the change in the energy vortex related to anything that might be happening to Zen? Chapter 3100, Rummage Around. The energy vortex swirled and constantly changed its shape in Zen's hands. According to the information Jeffrey and the shape-shifting spirit had provided, the guard might be able to control the energy vortex freely through this way. Then again, that was only his guess. After all, he was in the Iron House, so he couldn't see the outside world. The sight of Zen rubbing the energy vortex's phantom made Elvenia a little curious. Go to the door and see if those energy bands disperse, he ordered. In turn, Elvenia nodded and went downstairs to the entrance of the Iron House. When she looked out along the entryway, her face looked slightly surprised. The energy bands had besieged the Iron House, but now the energy bands were far away. She immediately returned to the upper floor and told Zen, those energy bands are already far away. It looked like Zen had already guessed it, though. He pointed to the energy vortex in his hand and said, the Iron House is in this part of the energy vortex and we're out of the vortex now. If that's the case, can we step into the Desire World directly? Elvenia asked. However, Zen shook his head and replied, maybe we can't. The other shore seemed to be a complex multi-layer space. Moreover, the Desire World and the Lust World might not be in the same space. On the other hand, the energy vortex played a role in connecting the two worlds. Therefore, anyone who wanted to enter the Desire World had to go through the energy vortex. Then what should we do? Elvenia asked, her eyes blinking a few times. Despite her questions, Elvenia was also clever enough to figure it out on her own. As she stayed with Zen, however, it seemed that she didn't think too much about it. Since the energy vortex can be controlled, it's easy for us to go through it, Zen said with a smile. At that moment, he reached out and grabbed the phantom of the energy vortex again. He gently fiddled with it, and then the energy vortex became elongated. Finally, he was able to expand the passageway in the middle. In stage 14, the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace saw that the energy vortex wriggled a few times before it returned to its original state, but the energy channel, which was already restored to its original state, was still twisting. This energy vortex stretched constantly and extended down to the Desire World. Furthermore, the small passage in the center was surprisingly wide and went down like a staircase. What happened to the energy vortex? With such a large space, it's easy to pass through. Is it because of Princess Elvenia? It's impossible. Many of the Oneness Sky Palace disciples were still dumbfounded as they watched the energy vortex change. They guessed that Elvenia had found a big secret in the energy vortex, and controlled the entirety of it. This assumption, however, wasn't logical at all. Quite some time had passed, and the energy vortex still floated between stage 13 and stage 14. history told that the origin of this powerful energy vortex was still unknown. A few people speculated that it was the foundation for the construction of the other shore. But to control a mass of pure energy, it was impossible. Among so many disciples from the Oneness Sky Palace, perhaps only Dorothy believed that such a thing was possible. After all, she and Zen had traveled on the other shore, and she had seen him do many seemingly impossible things. Yet, on a second thought, Dorothy guessed that Zen might have completed that thing along with Elvenia. The idea suddenly made her displeased. "Dorothy, what's wrong with you?" Hyam asked in curiosity. It turned out that he sensed the distressed emotions Dorothy's soul of light had released. Now, the sudden change in the energy vortex meant that there was a high chance of Zen and Elvenia's survival. Dorothy should be happy about that, shouldn't she? "Nothing," Dorothy answered coldly. Fortunately, Hyam was an experienced and wise man. When he thought about the past behaviors of the two women when they stayed with Zen, he was able to come up with an answer. These two outstanding women from the Oneness Sky Palace both had extraordinary backgrounds. It would be difficult for Zen to deal with them in the future. Meanwhile in the iron house, Elvenia stood in front of the tank. The soul crystal in the tank swirled around and turned into a thin shiny thread, which was absorbed by her space ring. The tank contained a large quantity of soul crystal. All the soul crystal the Oneness Sky Palace had collected in stage 4 might not even reach 1/3 of the soul crystal in the tank. Although Elvenia's and Zen's souls of light had turned into indigo souls, they would suffer more pressure in the desire world, and there was a higher demand on their souls of light. There was always a lack of soul crystal, so Elvenia would not leave even a little bit of it. As for Zen, he searched around in the room. Next to the iron table were two cases, both unlocked. Zen rudely opened one of them. The first case was empty and dark inside. He opened the other one, and saw a row of black jades displayed in it. He took out a piece of jade and placed it on his palm. Suddenly, an ice-cold sensation spread throughout his being. "What's this?" The black jade exuded a unique aura, but it didn't contain the other shore power. At that moment, he remembered No 9527's words that he shouldn't underestimate those things that didn't contain the other shore power, because they must have a special use. Of course, he was very interested in them. "This is the body-strengthening jade," the regal jade spirit quickly replied. "Body-strengthening jade? What's it used for?" Zen asked curiously. "It is used for body refining, similar to the soul crystal. It can be used to strengthen the body after it is refined, but..." The regal jade spirit thought for a second, and then continued, "This might be useless to you. Generally speaking, one could also cultivate themselves when their physical body had entered the other shore. Aside from cultivating slowly in the stages, there were also some shortcuts. One of them was to use the body-strengthening jade to refine the body, which could quickly strengthen the body. It was also the good way for the cultivation of the wild gods. In the past, the warriors didn't need any chaotic source spirit. It was still a pity that the truth of powerful holy body was prohibited, and even the body-strengthening jade became rare. Many super forces sold them at cheap prices, after they discovered some body-strengthening jades. Now, the value of the body-strengthening jade was naturally much less than that of the soul crystal. "Since it can strengthen the body, why is it useless to me?" Zen asked. "The foundation for you to enter the other shore is not the truth of powerful holy body. You don't need to use it, but you can try," the regal jade spirit proposed. Zen had entered the other shore through the unique truth of godly way. Even his physical body was no longer his body in its true sense, but rather a completely supernormal one that was created through body refining. Therefore, the regal jade spirit was certain that the body-strengthening jade wouldn't be useful to Zen. Regardless of whether he could use the thing or not, Zen took all the body-strengthening jades from the bottom of the iron case and placed them into Elvenia's space ring. Then, he rummaged around the iron house once more. Before he was about to leave, his eyes fell on the metal token embedded in the iron table. Without too much hesitation, he reached out to light up the Sanskrit words around the token one by one, and then took the token out.